The sound of metal against metal echoed through the North Star convenience store at midnight. Michael Reynolds stood motionless, listening to the ragged breathing of the unfamiliar woman behind the counter, while his daughter Sophie's small hand trembled in his. The fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating the black SUV parked outside where two shadowy figures waited. What should have been a simple late-night milk run for tomorrow's breakfast had suddenly transformed into an unwanted confrontation. The evening had started like any other Tuesday in suburban Pine Ridge, Colorado. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, their snow-capped peaks barely visible in the moonlight that streamed through the kitchen window of the Reynolds home. Michael sat at the kitchen table of his modest two-bedroom ranch house, helping 8-year-old Sophie with her math homework. The warm glow of the pendant light created a circle of concentration around her small frame as her pencil moved carefully across the worksheet. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a habit that always reminded Michael of Rachel, his late wife. 7 times 8 is... Sophie paused, her forehead crinkling as she counted silently on her fingers. Think about it like 7 times 4. Twice, Michael suggested gently, his calloused fingers pointing to the problem. Years of teaching Sophie to approach challenges methodically had become second nature. Whether those challenges involved multiplication tables or the more difficult lessons about life and loss they'd faced together. At 48, Michael's weathered hands bore the marks of 2 distinct lives. 15 years in the Navy SEALs had left calluses from weapons training and combat, while the last 3 years as the owner of Reynolds Auto Repair had added fresh marks from wrenches and engine parts. His salt and pepper hair was still cut military short, and though his 6-foot frame carried more weight than during his service days, he remained strong and capable. The small but respected auto shop specialized in classic cars and off-road vehicles, earning the trust of local residents and fellow veterans alike. 56, Sophie exclaimed triumphantly, writing down the answer with meticulous care. Her blue eyes, so much like her mother's, bright with accomplishment as she finished the last problem on the page. I finished, Dad. Can we have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow? Michael glanced at the nearly empty milk carton on the counter. They'd gone through their usual grocery routine on Sunday, but Sophie's recent growth spurt had them consuming milk at an alarming rate. Only if we have milk, sweetheart, he said, already knowing what that meant. The refrigerator hummed in the background as Michael opened it, confirming what he already suspected. The milk carton contained barely enough for Sophie's bedtime glass, let alone tomorrow's pancakes. He checked his watch. 11:15 p.m. The nearest grocery store closed at 10 o'clock p.m., but North Star, a 24/7 convenience store down on Maple Street, would be open. It wasn't the cleanest place in town, and the coffee always tasted like it had been brewing since the Reagan administration, but it served its purpose for late-night emergencies. We need to make a quick milk run, Michael announced, closing the refrigerator door. Bedtime after that, kiddo. School tomorrow. Can I come with you? Sophie asked, already sliding off her chair, anticipation brightening her features. Since Rachel's death 3 years ago in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, Sophie had developed attachment anxiety that made her reluctant to let Michael out of her sight, especially at night. The psychologist had explained it was normal, a fear response to the sudden loss of her mother. Michael had learned to balance reassurance with gentle encouragement toward independence. He considered the late hour against the anxiety he knew would plague Sophie if left alone. The drive to North Star would take 5 minutes each way, plus a few minutes inside. He ran through the mental calculation he'd performed countless times since becoming a single parent, weighing immediate comfort against long-term resilience. Tonight, comfort won out. Okay, kiddo, grab your jacket. Quick trip. Sophie's face lit up as she slid from her chair, hurrying to retrieve her purple jacket from the hook by the door. Michael gathered his keys and wallet, patting his back pocket out of habit to ensure his tactical folding knife was still there, a remnant of military habits he'd never managed to break. Even in the peaceful streets of Pine Ridge, the autumn air carried a crisp chill as they stepped outside. Michael's trusted Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, a vehicle chosen as much for its reliability as for the way its spacious cabin made him feel secure with Sophie beside him. The truck had been Rachel's suggestion years ago, practical yet comforting, like so many of her ideas had been. He helped Sophie into her booster seat, double-checking the straps before closing the door and circling around to the driver's side. The drive to North Star was quiet, the streets of Pine Ridge nearly empty. Michael's truck hummed steadily as they passed darkened storefronts and residential streets. Sophie clutched her favorite teddy bear, a well-worn companion that had seen her through the worst days after her mother's death. Its fur was matted in places, one eye slightly loose despite Michael's careful stitching. But to Sophie, it remained perfect. "Dad, did Mom like pancakes?" Sophie asked suddenly, her voice small in the truck's cabin. Michael's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. These questions came less frequently now, but they never failed to create that familiar ache in his chest. Not quite the sharp pain of fresh grief, but a dull, persistent reminder of absence. She loved them. She used to add blueberries to the batter and make smiley faces with whipped cream for you. "I remember the faces," Sophie said thoughtfully, "but I don't remember if she liked to eat them." "She did," Michael replied, swallowing hard. "She would steal bites from your plate and pretend it wasn't her. You'd laugh so hard milk would come out your nose." Sophie smiled at that, satisfied with maintaining the small connection to a mother she was gradually forgetting. Michael fought the wave of grief that still ambushed him at unexpected moments like these. Before Rachel's death, he'd been a different man, less cautious, more open to the world. Now his entire existence revolved around keeping Sophie safe and preserving what remained of their fractured family. A sudden memory flooded his mind. Rachel sitting at their kitchen table, blue eyes twinkling as she demonstrated how to divide fractions to a 5-year-old Sophie. "Always flip and multiply, sweetheart," she'd said, her voice musical with patience. Sophie had nodded seriously, her small face a perfect miniature of her mother's determined expression. Michael had stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by love for them both, never imagining that within months, their family would be torn apart. The North Star parking lot was nearly empty when they pulled in. The store's neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting an eerie blue glow across the asphalt. Only a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows idled near the entrance, its engine running despite no one being visible inside. Michael's military instincts, honed through 2 tours in Afghanistan, registered the anomaly immediately. Why would someone leave a luxury SUV running unattended at this hour? "Stay close to me, Soph," he said, helping her down from the truck. The cold night air carried the scent of exhaust fumes and the faint sweetness of antifreeze, unusual for a vehicle that appeared new and well-maintained. Another mental flag raised in Michael's mind as they approached the store entrance. The familiar bell chimed their arrival, and harsh fluorescent lighting made everything look stark and clinical after the darkness outside. The cold linoleum floor squeaked under their boots as they entered. Behind the counter stood a young woman Michael had never seen before. According to her name tag, she was Rebecca. She appeared to be in her mid-20s with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her complexion pale under the unflattering lights. Something about her demeanor immediately triggered Michael's internal alarm system. Her movements were jerky and uncertain as she organized items behind the counter. She kept glancing toward the windows with an expression Michael recognized from his military days, the look of someone expecting trouble. Her hands trembled visibly as she arranged packets of cigarettes, nearly dropping several in the process. Her breathing pattern showed classic signs of fear, rapid, shallow breaths, with occasional attempts to control it through deeper inhalations. Michael's eyes scanned the store methodically, a habit from countless building clearances in hostile territory. The store was small, consisting of 6 short aisles stocked with overpriced groceries, automotive supplies, and household essentials. A coffee station occupied the far corner, the pot half full of what was likely hours-old brew. 2 security mirrors mounted in opposite corners revealed no other customers. The back wall held refrigerated units with drinks and dairy products, their destination. The rear exit was marked with a glowing sign, its push bar wrapped with a chain and padlock, a fire code violation that now represented a tactical problem. "I want to look at the candy, Dad," Sophie said, tugging at his jacket and pointing toward the colorful display in aisle 3. Michael hesitated, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right, but the store was small with clear sight lines down every aisle. "Okay, but stay where I can see you," he conceded, watching as she moved eagerly toward the candy section, still clutching her teddy bear. As Sophie wandered off, Michael approached the counter, ostensibly to ask about the location of milk. He maintained a casual posture, but his eyes carefully scanned the store again, noting exits, potential weapons, and anything out of place. The metal napkin dispenser could serve as a blunt object. The shelf of motor oil provided a potential slipping hazard. The heavy flashlights on sale near the register could be used for striking. His tactical analysis was automatic, a habit ingrained by years of combat training. "Evening," he said to the young woman, keeping his voice friendly but neutral. "You're new here." Rebecca's eyes darted to him, then back to the window where the black SUV was visible. "Just started last week," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands continued to tremble as she straightened items that didn't need straightening. Michael recognized the signs of someone under extreme stress: dilated pupils, shallow breathing, micro expressions of fear flashing across her face. This wasn't the normal anxiety of a new employee or even someone worried about a late-night robbery. This was the terror of someone who knew a specific threat was imminent. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, positioning himself so his back wasn't to the door. The scanner slipped from Rebecca's shaking fingers and clattered onto the counter. She looked up at Michael with eyes drowning in fear and whispered words that confirmed his suspicions. "They've been following me for 3 days. Please call the police." Michael's body shifted imperceptibly into a state of heightened alertness, a condition his military instructors had called controlled combat readiness. His senses sharpened, adrenaline beginning to flow, but his outward appearance remained calm. He maintained his casual stance, but mentally mapped every potential threat and resource in the immediate vicinity. He pulled out his phone discreetly, only to find no signal. The screen showed full battery but 0 bars, not even enough for an emergency call. "Jammed," he muttered, recognizing the telltale signs of a signal blocker, technology he'd encountered in combat zones. Signal jammers operated by creating interference across specific radio frequencies, effectively creating a dead zone for cellular communications. This was professional-grade equipment, not something common criminals would deploy. "Where's the store phone?" Michael asked, his voice low and steady. "Cut," Rebecca whispered, a slight tremor in her voice. "I tried it 10 minutes ago. Nothing." "Who's following you?" Michael pressed, his eyes scanning the parking lot through the store windows. The Escalade remained idling, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the occupants. Rebecca's eyes flickered toward the SUV again. "I'm a senior accountant for Harrison Industries," she whispered, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her uniform shirt. "I found evidence of money laundering involving local government officials, large-scale construction contracts, kickbacks, offshore accounts. I turned everything over to the FBI." Michael knew Harrison Industries well, a major real estate development company based in Denver, owned by Charles Harrison, a former counterterrorism specialist who'd built an empire after leaving government service. Harrison had powerful connections throughout Colorado and was often photographed with politicians and business leaders. His company handled everything from luxury condos to government facilities, with contracts worth hundreds of millions. "The federal trial starts Monday," Rebecca continued, her voice trembling. "I'm the key witness and the only one with documented evidence. If I don't testify, dangerous people walk free." She glanced at Sophie, who was comparing candy bars, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling through the air. "I'm sorry you and your daughter walked into this." Michael followed her gaze to Sophie, his chest tightening at the sight of his daughter, happily oblivious to the danger surrounding them. In Afghanistan, he'd made split-second decisions that meant life or death for his team. Now the stakes felt infinitely higher. Sophie's safety hung in the balance. The bell above the door chimed softly and Michael tensed. But it was just another customer, a middle-aged construction worker in a heavy jacket who nodded at Michael and headed straight for the coffee machine. The man moved with the measured pace of someone at the end of a long shift, his work boots caked with dried mud, his hands bearing the calluses and small scars of manual labor. The momentary distraction gave Michael precious seconds to process the situation. His phone was useless. The store's landline was cut. Sophie was vulnerable, and this young woman appeared to be in genuine danger. Michael had sworn after Rachel's death that Sophie's safety would always come first. His last words to his dying wife had been a promise to protect their daughter above all else. Yet walking away and leaving this young woman to face whatever waited for her in that SUV felt like abandoning everything he'd sworn to protect during his years of service. He watched Sophie select a Snickers bar, her favorite, the wrapper crinkling in her small hands as she examined it. The smart play was to grab Sophie, get in the truck, and call the police from somewhere else, he thought. But even as he considered this option, he knew the SUV could easily follow them, potentially creating a more dangerous situation on the road. A high-speed pursuit with Sophie in the vehicle was unacceptable. He needed to make a decision that would keep both Sophie and this woman safe. The construction worker paid for his coffee, adding an alarming amount of sugar with the focused intensity of someone who'd been working double shifts. As he approached the counter, he gave Michael a subtle nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between men who recognized something in each other. The man's calloused hands and the faded USMC tattoo on his forearm told Michael everything he needed to know. "Evening," the man said, his voice gruff but friendly. "You good here?" It was a loaded question asked in the specific way veterans often checked on each other. Michael gave an imperceptible shake of his head as Rebecca rang up the purchase. The construction worker, Mike Thompson according to the name stitched on his jacket, met Michael's eyes again as he collected his change. At 53, his face showed the weathering of a life spent working outdoors, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Weather's turning. You folks drive safe." With that, he left, the bell chiming his departure. Michael immediately began assessing their options, mentally cataloging everything in the store that could serve as a weapon or defensive tool. His tactical mind worked through various scenarios, calculating angles of approach, defensive positions, and potential escape routes. He focused on the items that could be repurposed as tools: motor oil and cleaning chemicals for creating slippery surfaces, the coffee pot as a throwing weapon, the heavy flashlight as a striking tool. His tactical knife in his boot, a habit he'd never abandoned after leaving the service, would be a last resort. Outside, one of the SUV's doors opened. "Sophie," Michael called quietly. "Come here, sweetheart." She looked up, hearing the subtle change in his tone, a signal they'd developed after Rachel's death. It wasn't panic in his voice, but calm authority that told her this was important. "Is something wrong, Dad?" she asked, clutching her candy bar as she hurried to his side. Michael knelt to her level, keeping his back to the wall and his eyes on the entrance. "Remember our special hide-and-seek game?" he asked, referring to the safety drills they'd practiced at home, a precaution he'd implemented after losing Rachel. They'd practiced them regularly, turning potential life-saving actions into a game that wouldn't frighten her. Sophie nodded solemnly. Despite being only 8, she showed a maturity beyond her years, a resilience inherited from both her parents that had helped her survive the trauma of losing her mother. Her blue eyes, so like Rachel's, held a wisdom that sometimes broke Michael's heart. "When I give the signal, I want you to hide behind the cereal display. Stay quiet and don't come out until I call our special word. Understand?" "Lighthouse?" Sophie whispered their code word, her eyes wide but trusting. Michael squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's right. You're so smart, just like your mom." The bell above the door chimed again, and Michael's head snapped toward the sound with reflexes honed by too many nights spent listening for footsteps that didn't belong. 2 men entered, both in their 40s, both carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of trained operatives. Michael recognized the physical tells immediately: the balanced stance, the controlled scanning of the environment, the subtle bulges of concealed weapons. The first man was broad-shouldered, with a snake tattoo crawling up from his collar, visible even under his tactical jacket. His muscular build spoke of years of physical training, and the way he entered the space, claiming it, assessing threats, screamed a military background. The second moved with predatory precision, his gray eyes scanning the store methodically, cold and emotionless. Slimmer than his companion, but no less dangerous. He reminded Michael of the CIA operatives he'd occasionally worked with overseas, the kind who appeared unremarkable until the moment they weren't. Michael recognized the type immediately: private military contractors, likely former special operations, not common street thugs or hired muscle, but skilled professionals. This confirmed the seriousness of whatever Rebecca had witnessed. "Get behind me," Michael whispered to Sophie, who pressed herself against his back, still clutching her candy bar. He could feel her small body trembling, but she remained quiet. Another lesson from their emergency drills. "Evening, Rebecca," the tattooed man said, his voice carrying false warmth. "Time to go." Michael positioned himself strategically between the men and the counter, careful not to make any sudden movements that might escalate the situation. He gave Sophie the hand signal they had practiced. 3 fingers tapped against his leg, and she immediately slipped away toward the cereal display, silent as a shadow. Michael had taught her well. Emergency drills had been a regular part of their lives since Rachel's death. "Gentlemen," Michael said, his voice steady, "store was about to close. You might want to make your purchases and head out." The second man's jacket shifted slightly, revealing the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster. "This doesn't concern you, friend. Just walk away." Michael's muscles coiled in preparation, his weight shifting subtly to the balls of his feet, center of gravity lowering, a combat stance as automatic as breathing. "Can't do that." The tattooed man narrowed his eyes, studying Michael more carefully. Recognition dawned slowly, spreading across his features like an oil stain. "Reynolds? Michael Reynolds?" Michael maintained his neutral expression, but inside his mind raced. The voice was familiar now that he heard it again. Logan Pierce, a former teammate from SEAL Team 6. They'd served together during Operation Iron Shield in Afghanistan 10 years ago. The mission had been a high-risk hostage rescue that had gone sideways, resulting in the loss of 3 team members. "Logan," Michael acknowledged cautiously, "didn't expect to see you here." "World's full of surprises," Logan replied, tension evident in his stance. "You're looking at one right now. Step aside, Michael. This isn't your fight." When the second man, Garrett Reed, based on Logan's subtle nod toward him, seemed annoyed by this unexpected connection. His cold gray eyes showed no emotion, only calculation. At 35, he moved with the efficiency of someone thoroughly trained in close protection and elimination tactics, likely ex-CIA based on his bearing and methodology. "We don't have time for reunions, Pierce. We have a job," Garrett said, his voice clipped and professional. Michael kept his position, mind working through scenarios. Logan had been a solid operator once, one of the best in their unit, but rumors had circulated after Afghanistan that he'd gone private, working for PMCs with questionable ethics. The fact that he was here threatening a federal witness confirmed how far he'd fallen. "Whatever Harrison's paying you, it's not worth it," Michael said quietly. "This woman is under federal protection." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "She won't be if she doesn't make it to Monday. Last chance to walk away, Reynolds. We've got nothing against you or your kid." The mention of Sophie sent a cold wave through Michael's system. These men knew he had his daughter with him, which meant they had been watching the store when they arrived. The threat against Sophie, however veiled, ignited something primal in Michael's chest, a protective rage he kept carefully controlled beneath his calm exterior. "I can't let you take her," Michael said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that anyone who had served with him would recognize as a final warning. Logan's expression showed conflict, the first crack in his professional demeanor. "Michael, we've got 3 minutes before our backup starts wondering what's taking so long. Take your daughter and go. Forget what you saw here." Behind him, Michael could sense Rebecca's fear, almost palpable in the air. She was clutching the counter so hard her knuckles had turned white. "You know I can't do that, Logan," Michael replied. Garrett lost patience. "Enough talking." His hand moved towards his concealed weapon. That's when they all heard it, the tiny snap of a candy wrapper from behind the cereal display. Sophie, trying to open her Snickers bar with trembling fingers, had made just enough noise to betray her position. Garrett's predatory instincts immediately shifted focus. He moved with frightening speed toward the cereal display, reaching it before Michael could intercept him. The man's training was evident in his fluid movement. No wasted energy, just lethal purpose. "Well, well," Garrett said, emerging with Sophie firmly in his grip, her blue eyes wide with terror. "Looks like we have a bargaining chip." Michael felt ice flood his veins as Garrett positioned Sophie between them, one arm around her small shoulders. His daughter's face reflected pure fear, but beneath it, Michael could see her struggling to remember their safety drills, to trust that her father would protect her. The teddy bear dangled from her fingers, nearly forgotten in her terror. "Let her go, Reed," Michael said, his voice deadly calm. "She's innocent." Put your hands where I can see them, Reynolds, Garrett demanded, or your daughter becomes completely orphaned tonight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Sophie's frightened face. Michael raised his hands slowly, every fiber of his being focused on his daughter's safety. He'd faced down insurgents, survived firefights, and defused bombs, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer terror of seeing his child in danger. Logan's posture had changed, tension visible in his shoulders as he watched Garrett use a child as leverage. "Reed, this wasn't part of the plan," he muttered. "Plans change," Garrett replied coldly. "Get the accountant. I'll handle Reynolds and the kid." As Logan moved toward Rebecca, by singing, Michael's mind raced through combat scenarios, weighing risks against outcomes with the precision that had kept him alive through 2 tours. Every option ended with Sophie in danger unless he timed his move perfectly. He needed to create an opening, a moment of distraction that would allow him to neutralize the threat without endangering his daughter. "I remember you now, Reynolds," Logan said, his voice oddly reflective as he approached the counter. "Operation Iron Shield, Kandahar. You saved those hostages when everyone said it was a suicide mission." Michael kept his eyes on Sophie, trying to project calm reassurance. "That was a lifetime ago, Logan." "3 of our team died that day," Logan continued, almost as if thinking aloud. "Johnson took that RPG meant for you. Williams bled out under your hands, and Torres, that bomb. He never made it out of that compound." "I remember every one of them," Michael said quietly. The memories were still vivid, the dust, the heat, the metallic smell of blood. The weight of Williams as Michael tried desperately to staunch the bleeding from a severed femoral artery. The way Torres had looked at him in those final moments, asking Michael to tell his wife and daughters that he loved them. The nightmares had faded over time, but never completely disappeared. Logan nodded, a strange respect in his eyes despite the circumstances. "You were always the best of us, Reynolds, the moral compass." He paused. "What happened to you after you got out?" "Life," Michael answered simply. "Marriage, a daughter, then a drunk driver took my wife 3 years ago." Something shifted in Logan's expression, a flicker of shared understanding. "I got out after that last tour, PTSD, nightmares. They didn't want to know. Wife left, took my daughter. Haven't seen Lily in 3 years." The mention of his daughter caused a subtle shift in Logan's demeanor. A softening around the eyes, a momentary vulnerability. Michael filed this information away, sensing a potential leverage point if things escalated further. Garrett interrupted impatiently. "Touching reunion. Now grab the accountant so we can finish this." Emma's eyes found Michael's, wide with fear, but trusting him completely. Michael gave her the subtle nod they'd practiced, their signal that everything would be okay, that he had a plan. He saw her almost imperceptibly relax, her small shoulders dropping just a fraction. Even in her terror, she trusted in him. The convenience store's air conditioner kicked on with a mechanical groan, momentarily distracting Garrett. It was the opening Michael had been waiting for. He dropped instantly into a fighting stance, muscles coiled like springs. "Sophie, down," he commanded. With the instinctive response of a child who had practiced emergency drills, Sophie went limp in Garrett's grip, suddenly becoming dead weight. Simultaneously, Michael launched himself forward, a lifetime of training compressed into pure kinetic energy. His shoulder connected with Garrett's sternum before the man could adjust his grip on Sophie. The impact lifted Garrett off his feet and sent him crashing into a display of chips. Sophie scrambled free, darting behind a shelf as Michael had taught her. Logan hesitated, caught between his mission and the unexpected turn of events. That split second of indecision was all Rebecca needed. She grabbed the coffee pot and hurled the scalding liquid at Logan's face. The convenience store erupted into chaos. Garrett recovered quickly, his training evident as he regained his footing and reached for his weapon. Michael knew he couldn't allow him to draw. He closed the distance, employing the close-quarters combat techniques that had become second nature during his military career. Michael struck with precision, targeting Garrett's weapon arm with a combination of strikes designed to temporarily disable the limb's motor function. He leveraged his weight into each blow, aiming for nerve clusters and pressure points that would cause maximum effect with minimal force. Garrett countered with a knife that appeared in his left hand, slashing upward and catching Michael across his right shoulder. Pain blazed through Michael's arm, but adrenaline pushed it to the background. Blood warmed his skin beneath his jacket, but the wound wasn't deep enough to impede his movement. Not yet, anyway. He absorbed the momentum of Garrett's attack, redirecting it to throw the man off balance. Years of martial arts training merged with combat experience as Michael maintained control of the engagement's tempo. Logan finally made his decision, moving to restrain Rebecca. But his movements lacked conviction, his eyes constantly darting to where Sophie had hidden. The conflict on his face was evident. This wasn't the mission he'd signed up for. Michael found himself fighting with one eye on Sophie's position, making sure neither assailant moved toward her. His protective instinct narrowed his world to one simple objective: keep these men away from his daughter. Every strike, every block, every movement was calculated to maintain the position between the threats and Sophie's hiding place. Garrett proved to be exceptionally skilled, matching Michael's techniques with counters of his own. A vicious elbow strike caught Michael in the ribs, sending a spike of pain through his side. Michael felt the distinct give of a cracked rib, but pushed through the pain, refusing to yield. The fight escalated as they crashed into shelving units, sending merchandise flying. Glass bottles shattered on the floor, creating a hazardous battlefield of broken shards and spilled liquids. "Dad!" Sophie cried out as she saw Michael take a hard hit. The sound of his daughter's fear triggered something primal in Michael. He pushed through the pain, finding reserves of strength that only fatherhood could unlock. With renewed focus, he systematically dismantled Garrett's defenses, exploiting the man's tendency to favor his right side. Michael was no longer the polished special operator he'd once been. Years of civilian life had softened him somewhat, but the core skills remained, hardwired into his muscle memory. Every strike was deliberate, every defensive move calculated. He fought not with the cold precision of a soldier, but with the desperate determination of a father protecting his child. A decisive strike to Garrett's solar plexus doubled the man over, followed by a knee to the face that sent him sprawling unconscious across the linoleum floor. Michael stood over him for a moment, breathing heavily, sweat mingling with blood from the cut on his shoulder. Michael turned immediately to find Logan holding Rebecca with one arm, his expression conflicted as he watched the fight's conclusion. Logan's grip wasn't as tight as it should have been, another sign of his internal struggle. "Let her go, Logan," Michael said, breathing heavily, blood seeping from the cut on his shoulder. "It's over." Logan's eyes moved to where Sophie peered out from behind the shelf, her small face streaked with tears, but showing remarkable composure for an 8-year-old. "She has your eyes," Logan said quietly, but her mother's expression. "Don't do this," Michael urged. "You're better than this." Logan's grip on Rebecca loosened slightly. "Am I? I don't even recognize myself anymore, Reynolds. After Lily was taken away, I just needed the money. Private military work was all I knew." Michael took a cautious step forward. "It's not too late to make a different choice." Sophie emerged from her hiding place, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Despite the danger, despite everything she'd witnessed, she moved toward them with the inexplicable courage of childhood. "Is your little girl okay?" she asked Logan, her voice small but steady. The simple question from a child struck Logan like a physical blow. Michael watched as the hardened exterior of the mercenary cracked, revealing the broken father beneath. Logan's arm fell away from Rebecca, who immediately scrambled toward Michael. "I don't know," Logan answered honestly, looking at Sophie with something akin to wonder. "I haven't seen her in 3 years. She'd be about your age now, 9. Sophie nodded solemnly. "My mom died 3 years ago. I miss her every day." Logan's professional demeanor crumbled entirely in the face of this child's raw honesty. He sank to one knee, his weapon forgotten at his side. "I'm sorry about your mom, kid." Behind them, Garrett began to stir, groaning as he regained consciousness. The moment of connection was shattered as reality reasserted itself. "We've got problems," Logan said, suddenly alert again. "There are 2 more men in the SUV and Garrett has a backup piece in his boot." As if on cue, Garrett's hand moved toward his ankle. Logan reacted instantly, launching himself at his former partner. "Not the kid, Reed!" he shouted as they collided. The sudden betrayal caught Garrett off guard. The 2 men grappled on the floor, a lethal struggle between professionals who knew exactly how to kill. Their movements were efficient and brutal, each seeking the advantage that would end the fight. "Dad!" Sophie cried as a gunshot echoed through the store. The sound was deafening in the confined space, leaving a ringing aftermath that seemed to suspend time itself. Logan rolled away from Garrett, blood spreading across his chest from a point-blank wound. Despite the injury, he managed to kick Garrett's gun away, sending it skittering under a display rack. "I've lost too much humanity already," Logan gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "But not this. Not a child, Reed." Michael pulled Sophie behind him and back toward the counter where Rebecca stood frozen in shock. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Those shots will bring his back up." Garrett struggled to his feet, blood streaming from a head wound where Michael had struck him earlier. His eyes burned with cold fury as he reached for a secondary weapon. "You're dead, Pierce," he snarled at Logan, who lay gasping on the floor. "And so is everyone else in this store." Logan's laugh was wet with blood. "Always were a predictable son of a bitch, Reed." He looked at Michael. "Get them out of here, Reynolds. I'll buy you time." Michael assessed the situation rapidly. Logan was critically wounded but still dangerous. Garrett was armed again, and 2 more threats waited outside. The odds were worsening by the second. "Sophie," Michael said firmly, "remember what we practiced at home? We're going to use those skills now." Sophie nodded, fear in her eyes but determination in her small jaw. Rachel's determination that had always made Michael proud. Even in this moment of crisis, Michael couldn't help but see his late wife and their daughter. The same stubborn courage, the same unwillingness to yield to fear. Garrett raised his weapon, but Logan launched himself from the floor in a last desperate attack, crashing into the man's legs. Both went down again in a tangle of limbs and curses. Blood smeared across the linoleum as they struggled. Logan's strength fading, but his resolve unbroken. "Go!" Logan shouted through gritted teeth as he grappled with Garrett. "Rear exit, now!" Michael didn't hesitate. He scooped Sophie into his arms and grabbed Rebecca's wrist, pulling her toward the store's back exit. As they reached the door, another gunshot rang out behind them. Michael resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on the exit. He slammed his shoulder against the emergency exit bar, breaking the chain that held it closed. Pain lanced through his injured shoulder, but adrenaline dulled the sensation. The alarm began to wail as they burst into the cold Colorado night. The mountain air bit at their faces, a stark contrast to the overheated interior of the store. "We have 3 minutes tops before this place is swarming with Harrison's men," Michael told Rebecca as they raced toward his truck. Sophie clung to his neck, her small body trembling against him. But she remained silent, understanding instinctively that noise could betray them. As he fumbled for his keys, the convenience store's front door slammed open. Garrett emerged, weapon raised, scanning the parking lot. Michael ducked behind a dumpster, holding Sophie close as he strategized their next move. The truck was 20 yards away, exposed under the parking lot lights. Garrett would spot them instantly if they made a break for it. "What do we do now, Dad?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling, but brave. Michael looked down at his daughter's trusting face, then at Rebecca's terrified one. He thought of Logan, who had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect a child he didn't even know. Perhaps seeking redemption for the daughter he'd lost. For all his faults, Logan had found a line he wouldn't cross. In his final moments, he'd rediscovered his humanity. In that moment, Michael Reynolds made a decision that would change everything. Sometimes protecting what matters most means taking the fight to those who threaten it. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. He had to end this now for Sophie's sake. "Now," he told them both with quiet certainty, "we fight back." The night air stung Michael's lungs as he assessed their situation. Behind the dumpster, Sophie's breathing came in quick, frightened gasps, while Rebecca's eyes darted frantically between the convenience store's back door and the surrounding darkness. The parking lot security lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, providing minimal cover but making movement easily detectable. In the distance, the familiar silhouette of Michael's F-150 sat tantalizingly close yet impossibly far, given their exposed position. "They'll expect us to run for the truck," Michael whispered, his tactical mind rapidly sorting through options. "That's exactly why we won't." He peered around the edge of the dumpster. Through the store's windows, he could see Garrett barking orders into a radio while checking Logan's motionless form for a pulse. The man's movements were methodical, even in crisis, the mark of a professional. Michael's mind flashed to Logan's final moments, the unexpected sacrifice from a man who'd chosen the wrong path but found redemption at the end. There would be time to process that later. Right now, survival demanded his full attention. Rebecca, Michael said quietly, exactly how many people are working with Harrison? At least 4 men tonight, she whispered. But his security team has over a dozen ex-military contractors. They're well-equipped and well-trained. Some former special forces like you, others from various special operations backgrounds. Harrison only hires the best. Michael nodded, the information confirming his suspicions. Harrison's resources were substantial, not just financially, but in terms of skilled personnel. This wasn't a simple threat, but a coordinated operation by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Their training would make them formidable, but also predictable to someone who shared their background. Sophie, remember when we went camping last summer? How we had to be really quiet to see the deer? Michael asked, turning to his daughter. Sophie's eyes widened with understanding. She nodded solemnly, her small hand clutching her teddy bear tighter. The camping trip had been their first real vacation after Rachel's death, a weekend in the mountains where Michael had taught Sophie about wildlife tracking and moving silently through the forest. What had been intended as father-daughter bonding now served a far more critical purpose. Just like that now, okay? Silent steps, Michael instructed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Despite the danger, he allowed himself a brief moment to marvel at her composure. 8 years old and already showing the kind of courage that would make any father proud. Rachel would have been amazed to see how their daughter had inherited her quiet strength and determination. There's a service alley behind that fence, Michael continued, pointing to a wooden barrier at the edge of the property. We're going to move along the tree line, stay in the shadows, and make our way around the building. No straight lines. Rebecca looked skeptical. What about your truck? Shouldn't we try to drive away? They've had plenty of time to sabotage it, Michael explained, and even if they haven't, we'd be completely exposed crossing the lot. Better to disappear and regroup. He didn't mention his other concern, that Harrison's men might have planted a tracking device on the vehicle. The truck would have to be abandoned, at least temporarily. A sudden commotion from inside the store indicated Garrett was on the move. Michael peered around the dumpster again to see the man emerging from the front entrance, weapon drawn, with 2 new figures flanking him, reinforcements from the SUV. Their coordinated movements confirmed Michael's assessment. These weren't ordinary thugs, but trained operatives with tactical experience. They moved with a disciplined precision that came from years of combat operations, spreading out to establish a search perimeter, just as Michael would have done in their position. Now, Michael whispered, follow me exactly, stay low, move only when I move. He took Sophie's hand and gestured for Rebecca to stay close. In a crouched position, they slipped from behind the dumpster and into the deeper shadows near the building's edge. Michael moved with the practiced silence of someone who had conducted night operations in hostile territory, each step carefully placed to avoid making sound. Sophie mimicked his movements perfectly, her small feet finding silent purchase where he led. Rebecca struggled more, her civilian inexperience showing in occasional missteps, but she adapted quickly. Tom adapted quickly, her survival instinct overcoming her fear. They reached the wooden fence as voices carried across the parking lot. Garrett was organizing a search pattern, dividing the area into sectors. Reynolds is military, Michael heard him say. He'll use tactical movement and seek cover. Expand the search radius to 3 blocks. Check all residences with lights on and find me information on his home address. Soon, flashlight beams began sweeping methodically across the property, moving in a grid pattern that would eventually cover every inch of the surrounding area. Time was running out. Through here, Michael whispered, pointing to a gap where one of the fence boards had partially broken away. Sophie first, then you, Rebecca. Sophie slipped through the narrow opening with the agility only a child possesses. Rebecca followed with more difficulty, wincing as splinters caught at her uniform. Michael came last, his broader shoulders barely squeezing through the gap. A nail tore at his jacket, leaving a jagged rip, but he emerged on the other side just as a flashlight beam swept past their previous position. The service alley behind the fence was littered with discarded pallets and overflowing dumpsters from neighboring businesses. The uneven ground was treacherous in the darkness, but it offered concealment as they moved away from the North Star. The cold night air carried the scent of garbage and wet cardboard, masking their own scent. A tactical advantage, Michael noted automatically. Where are we going? Rebecca whispered, stumbling over an unseen obstacle. First priority is distance, Michael replied, steadying her with one hand while keeping Sophie close with the other. We need to contact the authorities, but we can't use any obvious methods. They'll be monitoring police frequencies and cell towers. Sophie tugged at his jacket. Dad, what about Mr. Mike, the man with the coffee? He knew something was wrong. Michael paused, considering the construction worker with the marine tattoo. Good thinking, Sophie. He might have called for help already. Is he a friend of yours? Rebecca asked. Never met him before tonight, Michael admitted. But there's a code among veterans. He recognized trouble when he saw it. Michael had seen it countless times during his service, the way former military personnel could communicate volumes with just a glance, especially in potentially dangerous situations. Mike Thompson had clearly read the room correctly and made his exit, hopefully to summon help rather than simply avoid trouble. They continued down the alley until it intersected with a residential street. The suburban neighborhood was quiet at this hour, most windows dark except for the occasional porch light or second-story bedroom. Michael guided them toward a small playground nestled between houses, its equipment casting strange, elongated shadows under the streetlights. A swing set creaked softly in the night breeze, the sound eerily reminiscent of the North Star's door chime, a comparison that sent an involuntary shiver down Michael's spine. We'll rest here for a minute, Michael decided, guiding them beneath a covered slide structure where they would be hidden from the street. I need to check something. He knelt beside Sophie, examining her for any injuries. Finding none, he turned his attention to Rebecca, who was trembling from both fear and the night's chill. Her North Star uniform offered little protection against the cold Colorado night, and shock was beginning to set in. Her face was pale in the dim light, her eyes wide but focused, still processing the violence she'd witnessed, but holding herself together through sheer determination. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. She shook her head. Just scared. Those men, they'll keep coming, won't they? Yes, Michael answered honestly, seeing no point in false reassurances. Harrison has too much to lose if you testify, but we have an advantage now. What's that? Rebecca asked skeptically. They've lost the element of surprise. Michael began checking his own injuries. The knife wound on his shoulder had mostly stopped bleeding, but his ribs protested with sharp pain when he moved, definitely cracked, possibly broken. He'd fought through worse in Kandahar after an IED had flipped their Humvee. At least this time, he didn't have to carry a wounded teammate through a hostile village while under sniper fire. The memory of that night, the weight of Corporal Martinez on his shoulders, the metallic taste of fear, the desperate rush to the extraction point flashed through his mind before he pushed it away, focusing on the present danger. Dad, Sophie asked quietly, are the bad people going to find us here? Michael paused, considering his answer carefully. He'd never lied to Sophie, even after Rachel's death, when the temptation to soften the brutal truth had been overwhelming. I don't think so, he replied honestly, but we need to keep moving soon. We need to find somewhere safe where we can get help. Sophie nodded, accepting his assessment. Will Rebecca be okay? We're going to help her, right? We're going to make sure of it, Michael promised. That's what we do, right? Help people who need it. Like Mom always said, Emma agreed, a small smile touching her lips. Be the good you want to see in the world. Michael's throat tightened, Catherine's favorite saying, now preserved in their daughter's memory. Exactly like that. He turned to Rebecca. We need to get somewhere secure where we can contact the authorities. Do you have any safe houses or contacts we can reach? Rebecca shook her head. I was in a safe house until yesterday. Agent Foster moved me to a hotel last night, saying there had been a security concern. She was supposed to take me to a new location tomorrow. Her voice faltered. I guess now I know why. Michael's mind raced through options. His home would be the first place they'd look. Police stations would be monitored. Hospitals required identification and asked too many questions. They needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere that wouldn't appear on any logical checklist of places associated with Michael Reynolds. Dad, can we go to Miss Margaret's? Sophie suggested quietly. Michael looked at his daughter in surprise. Margaret Winters? Sophie nodded. She always says I can come over anytime, even at night. She told me that after Mom died. Michael considered the suggestion. Margaret Winters was their 80-year-old neighbor, a retired high school principal who had taken a special interest in Sophie after Rachel's death. She lived alone in a modest house 3 blocks from the playground, with a son who visited weekly but otherwise maintained her independence with fierce determination. The kind of woman who still used a rotary phone and kept her late husband's shotgun in the hall closet just in case. Her home was a frequent sanctuary for Sophie, who often spent afternoons there after school when Michael worked late at the shop. What made Margaret perfect wasn't just her fondness for Sophie, but her complete disconnection from Michael's military past or Rebecca's situation. She was exactly the kind of ally they needed, someone with no obvious connection that Harrison's men would identify, but with enough life experience and practical wisdom to understand the gravity of the situation. Good thinking, Sophie, Michael said, his chest swelling with pride at his daughter's resourcefulness. Ms. Margaret it is. They left the playground, sticking to the shadows between streetlights. Rebecca hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. I was headhunted from my previous accounting firm. The salary was twice what I was making, and the benefits package was incredible. It seemed like my big break. A bitter smile crossed her face. For the first year, everything was perfect. I was handling major accounts, earning bonuses, living the dream. Then I noticed discrepancies in the government contract ledgers. And you investigated? Michael prompted. I thought it was just an accounting error at first, Rebecca continued, but the numbers kept adding up wrong, and the documentation had inconsistencies. When I brought it to my supervisor's attention, he told me to ignore it, said it was being handled at a higher level. But you didn't let it go, Michael surmised. Rebecca shook her head. I couldn't. The more I looked, the worse it got. Money being funneled through shell companies, kickbacks to government officials, forged documentation. It was systematic corruption on a massive scale. So you went to the FBI, Michael concluded. Not immediately, Rebecca admitted. I was scared. Harrison has a reputation for being ruthless in business. But when I found evidence that the deputy mayor was involved, I knew I had to do something. This wasn't just corporate fraud anymore. It was corrupting our entire city government. Michael nodded, respecting her courage. Whistleblowers often face severe repercussions, both professional and personal. Rebecca had known the risks, but chosen to act anyway, a decision that reflected a strong moral compass. Margaret's house appeared ahead, a small craftsman with a well-tended garden and a porch light that remained on all night, a habit from her childhood in rural Montana, she'd once explained to Michael. The property was surrounded by mature trees that provided additional privacy from the street. A single light glowed from what Michael knew to be the kitchen window, suggesting Margaret was still awake despite the late hour. Wait here, Michael instructed, positioning Rebecca and Sophie behind a large oak tree in the adjoining yard. I'll make sure it's safe. He approached the house cautiously, staying low and checking for any signs of surveillance. Finding none, he made his way to the back door rather than the front, knowing Margaret's bedroom was at the rear of the house. He tapped gently on the window, not wanting to frighten the elderly woman, but needing to alert her to their presence. After a moment, a light flickered on inside. The curtain moved slightly as Margaret peered out. Upon recognizing Michael, she immediately opened the door, her expression concerned but not afraid. At 80, Margaret Winters remained sharp-minded and remarkably self-possessed, her silver hair neatly braided for sleep, her posture still carrying the authority of her decades as an educator. Michael had always thought she looked like she should be wielding a ruler rather than a teacup, though he'd discovered she was equally proficient with both. Michael Reynolds, she said, taking in his disheveled appearance and the bloodstain on his jacket. This isn't a social call at 1 in the morning. No, ma'am, Michael replied with the respect he'd always shown her. Sophie and I need help, and we've brought someone who needs protection. Margaret's gaze hardened. Are you in trouble with the law? No, ma'am, just the opposite. We're trying to protect a witness. Margaret considered this for exactly 3 seconds before nodding decisively. Bring them in through the back. I'll put on some tea. Michael retrieved Sophie and Rebecca from their hiding place, guiding them quickly into Margaret's warm kitchen. The space was exactly as Michael remembered from previous visits, immaculately clean, furnished with antiques that had been well maintained for decades. Walls decorated with photographs of Margaret's late husband, her son, and various grandchildren. The subtle scent of cinnamon and cloves hung in the air, comfortingly familiar. The elderly woman took one look at Sophie's exhausted face and Rebecca's frightened expression and immediately went into action, her movements economical and purposeful. "Sophie, dear, you know where the guest room is. Take this young lady with you and find her something warm to change into from my granddaughter's closet," Margaret directed. "Michael, sit down before you fall down. That shoulder needs tending." As Rebecca and Sophie disappeared down the hallway, Margaret turned to Michael with a penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of students. "Now tell me everything." Michael gave her the condensed version: Rebecca's witness status, Harrison's hired guns, the confrontation at the North Star, and Logan's unexpected sacrifice. Margaret listened without interruption, only the tightening of her lips indicating her reaction. Her hands remained steady as she prepared a pot of Earl Grey, the familiar ritual at odds with the extraordinary circumstances. "I need to make some calls," Michael concluded, "but using my phone would lead them straight to us." "Use my landline," Margaret said, gesturing to an old rotary phone on the wall. "No one's traced a rotary call since the Cold War." Michael smiled despite the circumstances. Margaret's practicality was exactly what they needed. "I need to reach the FBI field office in Denver. Rebecca's their witness." "Make your call," Margaret said, rising from the table. "I'll check on the girls and get my first aid kit. That shoulder won't clean itself." Michael dialed the FBI field office, knowing the call would be routed to the on-duty agent. After identifying himself and explaining the situation, he was connected to Special Agent Diana Foster, the lead investigator on the Harrison Industries case. "Mr. Reynolds," Agent Foster's voice was crisp and professional, even at this hour. "We've been trying to reach Ms. Morgan for the past 2 hours. Her protective detail reported her missing from her designated safe house." "She's with me," Michael confirmed. "There was an incident at the North Star convenience store on Maple. 2 of Harrison's men attempted to abduct her. There's at least one casualty, a man named Logan Pierce, former military." "And you intervened?" Foster's tone was skeptical. "My daughter and I were in the wrong place at the wrong time," Michael explained. "I couldn't walk away." There was a pause as Agent Foster processed this information. "Our agents are en route to the convenience store now. We'll need your location to bring Ms. Morgan in." Michael hesitated. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something didn't feel right. How did Harrison's men know where to find her in the first place? She was supposed to be under federal protection. The silence on the other end stretched a beat too long. "We're investigating that breach," Agent Foster finally replied, "but right now our priority is securing our witness." "Someone in your office is compromised," Michael stated flatly. "We'll come in, but on my terms. I'll call back in 2 hours with a meeting location of my choosing." "Mr. Reynolds, I strongly advise—" "2 hours," Michael repeated, then hung up. He turned to find Margaret standing in the doorway, first aid kit in hand, her expression unreadable. "Trust issues?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "Healthy skepticism," Michael corrected. "Harrison has the kind of money and connections that can compromise even federal agencies. Until I know who Rebecca can trust, we play it safe." Margaret nodded, gesturing for him to remove his jacket. "Shirt too. Let's see what we're dealing with." Michael complied, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. The knife wound on his shoulder was shallow but ragged, cutting across his deltoid muscle. Margaret cleaned it efficiently with antiseptic, her hands steady despite her age. She worked with the precision of someone who had dressed many wounds over the years, a skill Michael suspected she'd acquired growing up on a Montana ranch long before she'd become an educator. "Should have stitches," she commented, "but butterfly bandages will have to do." As she worked, Michael explained his concerns about potential leaks within the FBI. "Harrison's been building his empire for years. He's got connections in local government, law enforcement, possibly federal agencies. We need to be careful who we trust." Margaret applied the final bandage with a firm pat. "In my 80 years, I've learned that power and money corrupt in equal measure. Your caution is warranted." She handed him a clean t-shirt from her late husband's drawer. "Now, what's your plan?" Michael pulled on the shirt carefully. "We need somewhere public enough to deter violence, but controlled enough to spot surveillance. Somewhere we can control the approaches and exits." The old train station downtown, Margaret suggested. It's being renovated, but the main hall is still used for community events. Multiple exits, good sight lines, and enough people during the day to provide witnesses. Michael nodded appreciatively. That could work. We'd need to get there early, scope it out. My son David is a contractor for the renovation, Margaret added. He has keys to the service areas. I can call him, he's discreet. Before Michael could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, now dressed in pajamas that were slightly too large for her. Her face was cleaner, but exhaustion shadowed her eyes. She clutched her teddy bear, the stuffed animal that had been her constant companion since Rachel's death. Dad, her voice trembled slightly. Are the bad men going to find us here? Michael opened his arms, and Sophie rushed into them, burying her face against his chest. He held her close, careful of his injured ribs. No, sweetheart. We're safe here with Miss Margaret. I'm scared, Sophie whispered. That man hurt Mr. Logan. He wanted to hurt you too. Michael stroked her hair gently. I know it's scary, but do you remember what Mom used to say about being brave? Sophie nodded against his chest. Being brave doesn't mean you are not afraid. It means you do what's right even when you are afraid. That's right, Michael affirmed. And right now, the brave thing is to rest. We've got a lot to do tomorrow. Margaret approached, resting a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. I've made up the guest room for you, dear. There's warm milk with honey on the nightstand, just the way you like it. Sophie looked up at Michael, reluctant to leave him. Will you come tuck me in? Of course, Michael promised. Go on ahead. I'll be there in a minute. As Sophie padded down the hallway, Michael turned to Margaret. Thank you for this. I know it's putting you at risk. Margaret waved away his concern. At my age, a little risk is invigorating. Besides, that child has suffered enough loss. I won't see her lose you too. Her expression softened. Rachel would be proud of you, Michael. The way you've raised Sophie, how you protect her, it's what Rachel would have wanted. The mention of his late wife sent a familiar pang through Michael's chest, but it was tempered by the warmth of Margaret's words. I hope so, he said quietly. After tucking Sophie in and assuring her that he would be nearby all night, Michael returned to the kitchen to find Rebecca and Margaret deep in conversation. Rebecca had changed into borrowed clothes, jeans and a sweater that must have belonged to Margaret's granddaughter. Her North Star uniform discarded, with her hair down and the cashier's outfit gone, she looked younger, more vulnerable. But there was a steely determination in her eyes that Michael recognized. It was the look of someone who had made a difficult choice and was prepared to see it through regardless of the consequences. How are you holding up? Michael asked, taking a seat across from her. Better now that we have a plan, Rebecca replied. Margaret explained about the train station. She hesitated, then continued, but I'm worried about Harrison. He doesn't give up, and he has resources we can't match. Tell me more about what you found, Michael said. The more I understand, the better I can anticipate his moves. Rebecca's expression hardened with resolve as she began to explain in detail the complex web of corruption she had uncovered. It started with discrepancies in the accounting for a government contract. A new courthouse in Denver, Rebecca explained, her fingers tracing patterns on Margaret's well-worn oak table. The numbers didn't add up, so I started digging. Michael listened intently as Rebecca outlined the sophisticated money laundering operations she had uncovered. Harrison Industries had been inflating costs on government projects, taking kickbacks and funneling money through shell companies to hide the paper trail. And local officials were involved, Michael prompted. 3 council members, a judge, and the deputy mayor, Rebecca confirmed, all on Harrison's payroll. When I realized the scope, I went straight to the FBI. They've been building their case for months, gathering evidence to ensure the charges stick. The trial starts Monday, Michael remembered. No wonder Harrison's desperate. If his operation is exposed, he loses everything, not just his business, Rebecca added. We're talking about potential RICO charges, decades in prison. He's fighting for his freedom. Michael nodded, the picture becoming clearer. A desperate man with resources was the most dangerous kind of adversary. It explained the level of force Harrison was willing to deploy, the risks he was taking. This wasn't just about silencing a witness. It was about survival. Did you work directly with Agent Foster? Michael asked. Yes, she's been my primary contact, Rebecca confirmed. She seemed trustworthy, professional. Maybe she is, Michael conceded, but someone gave up your location, and until we know who, we treat everyone with caution. Margaret, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. You both need rest. The guest room is prepared for Rebecca. Michael, you can take the sofa in my study. It's comfortable enough and positioned to see both the front and back entrances. Michael nodded gratefully. I'll take first watch. Nonsense, Margaret countered. I'll take the first watch. I sleep less than 4 hours a night at my age anyway. I've got my late husband's shotgun in the closet, and I still remember how to use it. Michael raised an eyebrow, and Margaret smiled thinly. Montana farm girl, remember? I was shooting prairie dogs before you were born, young man. Despite everything, Michael found himself smiling. Yes, ma'am. As Rebecca excused herself to get some rest, Michael conducted a final security check of the property, ensuring all entrances were secured and identifying potential egress routes in case of emergency. The house was well built with solid doors and windows that locked securely. Margaret had maintained it meticulously over the decades, another trait Michael respected about her. She understood that care and attention to detail mattered, whether in education or home maintenance. Satisfied, he returned to Margaret's study, where she had prepared the sofa with sheets and a pillow. The room was lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on history, education, and classic literature. A photograph on the desk caught his eye, a much younger Margaret standing beside a tall, broad-shouldered man in a Korean War uniform. Her late husband, Michael presumed. They were smiling, their posture suggesting a deep connection despite the formal nature of the photograph. Get some sleep, Michael, Margaret urged from the doorway. You've done all you can for tonight. Exhaustion washed over him as he stretched out on the sofa, his injured ribs protesting. Despite his training to function on minimal rest, the events of the night had taken their toll. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard, making his limbs feel leaden. His last thought before drifting into a light, vigilant sleep was of Sophie and the promise he'd made to Rachel to keep their daughter safe. No matter what, the nightmare came as it always did, fragments of memory distorted by grief and guilt. Rachel's voice on the phone telling him she was on her way home. The police at the door 3 hours later. The drunk driver who'd crossed the center line had survived. Rachel had not. In the dream, Michael was always running toward the crash site but never reaching it, his legs moving as if through deep water. Rachel's voice calling for him, growing fainter as he struggled to reach her. And then the silence, absolute and devastating. He awoke with a start, his body tensing for combat before he remembered where he was. Margaret's study was bathed in the gray light of early morning. His watch showed 5:43 a.m. He'd slept longer than intended, though his body still ached with fatigue. The pain in his ribs had settled into a dull throb, manageable but persistent. The shoulder wound stung when he moved, but Margaret's careful treatment had prevented infection. Moving carefully to avoid aggravating his injuries, Michael rose and made his way to the kitchen, where he found Margaret already awake, preparing coffee. She acknowledged him with a nod, her silver hair neatly arranged in its usual bun, her clothing simple but impeccable, a reminder that some routines persisted regardless of circumstances. All quiet through the night, she reported. David called back. He'll meet us at the train station at 8 with the keys. Thank you, Michael said, accepting a cup of coffee. For everything. Margaret's expression softened momentarily. That child in there has been through enough, so have you. Her tone became businesslike again. Now what's your plan once you are at the station? Michael sipped his coffee, organizing his thoughts. The hot liquid revived him, clearing away the last cobwebs of sleep and nightmare. Contact Agent Foster. Arrange the handoff, but on our terms. Controlled environment with multiple exit strategies. And if there is a leak in the FBI, Margaret pressed, then we adapt, Michael replied simply. I've already called an old friend from my unit, Jason Reeves. He works private security now. He'll be our backup at the station, watching for surveillance. Margaret nodded approvingly. Good. Never walk into uncertain situations without reinforcements. Michael smiled faintly at the advice. It was solid tactical thinking, the kind he'd learned in the military. But Margaret had apparently acquired it through 8 decades of practical living. How did you get to be so strategic, Margaret? 40 years as a high school principal, she replied dryly. Hormonal teenagers are more unpredictable than any enemy combatant. The sound of small footsteps announced Sophie's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her teddy bear. Upon seeing Michael, she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're okay?" she mumbled against his shirt. Michael knelt to her level, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "Of course I am, kiddo. Margaret took good care of us." Sophie looked up at Margaret with solemn gratitude. "Thank you for helping us, Miss Margaret." "You're very welcome, dear," Margaret replied, her stern features softening. "Now, how about some breakfast? You'll need your strength today." As Margaret busied herself preparing pancakes, a deliberate choice, Michael suspected, to maintain some normalcy for Sophie, Rebecca joined them. She looked better after some rest, though anxiety still shadowed her eyes. Her borrowed clothes fit reasonably well, and she pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail. Michael was struck again by her resilience, the quiet determination that had led her to stand against Harrison's corruption despite the risks. "I called Agent Foster back," Michael informed her as she accepted a cup of coffee. "We're meeting at the old train station downtown at 9 o'clock. My friend Jason will be there as backup." "Can we trust him?" Rebecca asked. "With my life," Michael confirmed. "With Sophie's life. We served together for 10 years. Rebecca nodded, accepting his assessment. "What about Margaret? Will she be safe here after we leave, if they track us?" "I've thought of that," Michael said. "Margaret, I'd like you to visit your sister in Boulder today, just as a precaution." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Evelyn will be delighted. She's been pestering me to visit for weeks." She slid a plate of pancakes in front of Sophie. "But I'll go after I see you safely to the station. David will meet us there at 8, remember?" "Of course," Michael replied as if it were obvious. "I'm driving you." "That truck of yours is still at the North Star, and public transportation is too exposed," Margaret said. "My Buick may be old, but it's reliable and, more importantly, unconnected to you." Michael opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, recognizing the determination in Margaret's expression. It was the same look Rachel had worn when her mind was made up, a comparison that made him both ache with loss and smile with recognition. "Thank you," he said simply. Breakfast proceeded with forced normalcy, Michael encouraging Sophie to eat while keeping watch on the street outside. The morning unfolded peacefully, suburban routines beginning as neighbors departed for work, sprinklers activated on carefully maintained lawns, and delivery trucks made their rounds. Nothing suggested Harrison's men had tracked them to this quiet street, but Michael maintained his vigilance. Complacency killed as surely as bullets. At 7:30, they prepared to leave, with Michael doing a final check of the property perimeter to ensure they weren't being observed. Margaret packed a small bag for Sophie, a change of clothes, some snacks, and a few books to keep her occupied. Small comforts that might make a big difference in the hours ahead. Margaret's Buick was parked in her detached garage, accessible via a side door that wasn't visible from the street. The vehicle was immaculately maintained, its aged exterior belying the sound mechanical condition Margaret insisted upon. Michael helped Sophie into the back seat, where she could lie down out of sight if necessary. Rebecca joined her while Michael took the passenger seat, positioning himself to monitor their surroundings as Margaret drove. "Ready?" Margaret asked, starting the engine. Michael nodded, his expression grim. "Let's go." The drive to the downtown train station took 20 minutes, Margaret navigating the morning traffic with the confidence of someone who had driven these streets for decades. Michael maintained a vigilant watch for any vehicles that might be following them, but detected no surveillance. Either Harrison's men were exceptionally skilled, or they had genuinely lost the trail last night. Michael suspected the latter, but prepared for the former. The Pine Ridge train station was a historic red brick building that had served the community since the early 1900s. Once the hub of the town's commerce, it had fallen into disrepair in the 1980s before being designated a historic landmark. The current renovation project aimed to preserve its architectural character while repurposing the space for community events and small businesses. The main hall, with its 30-foot ceilings and marble floors, retained much of its original grandeur, despite the scaffolding and construction materials that indicated the ongoing work. Margaret parked in the contractor's lot behind the building, where a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s waited beside a pickup truck. David Winters had his mother's direct gaze and no-nonsense demeanor, though his expression softened when he saw Sophie in the back seat. "Mom said you needed access," he said without preamble as they exited the vehicle. She didn't explain why, but said it was important. The less you know, the better, Michael replied, offering his hand. But we appreciate the help. David shook his hand firmly. Any friend of my mother's. He handed Michael a set of keys. These will get you into the main hall through the service entrance and give you access to the maintenance quarters. The renovation crew doesn't start until 10 o'clock today, so you've got the place mostly to yourself for now. Thank you, Michael said sincerely. David nodded, then turned to his mother. Ready to head to Aunt Evelyn's? I've got the day off. Figured I'd drive you. Margaret embraced Michael briefly. Be careful, she murmured, and bring that child back safe. I will, Michael promised. As Margaret and David departed, Michael surveyed their surroundings once more before guiding Sophie and Rebecca toward the service entrance. The heavy metal door opened with a creak, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled of fresh paint and old wood. Stay close, Michael instructed, leading them through the maintenance area and into the main hall. The grand space was impressive even in its partially renovated state. 30-foot ceilings arched overhead, supported by ornate columns. Large windows allowed morning light to stream across the marble floor, while scaffolding along one wall indicated the ongoing restoration work. The space was largely empty, save for a few workers setting up for an afternoon event, arranging chairs in the far corner. Perfect, Michael murmured, assessing the tactical advantages of the location. Multiple exits, good sight lines, plenty of cover if needed, and enough innocuous activity to deter overt violence. He checked his watch, 7:50 a.m. 10 minutes before Jason was due to arrive, over an hour before the scheduled meeting with Agent Foster. Time to prepare. Sophie, Michael said, kneeling to his daughter's level. Remember how we talked about safe places? This is like that game. If anything happens, if I tell you to run, I want you to go through that door. He pointed to a maintenance entrance partially hidden behind a column. Follow the corridor to the end, turn right, and there's a janitor's closet. Lock yourself inside and don't come out unless you hear our special word. Lighthouse, Sophie recited solemnly. That's right, Michael confirmed, his chest tight with a mixture of pride and concern. No 8-year-old should need such instructions, but Sophie's understanding might save her life. And if a stranger tries to take you? Scream as loud as I can and fight dirty, Sophie replied, repeating the self-defense basics he'd taught her. Eyes, throat, knees. Michael nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Good girl. A noise from the main entrance drew Michael's attention. He straightened, positioning himself between the newcomer and Sophie, his hand instinctively moving toward the tactical knife in his boot. But the tension left his shoulders as he recognized the man entering the hall. Jason Reeves stood 6'3", his powerful frame making him an imposing presence despite his casual attire. At 50, his close-cropped hair had gone completely gray, but his movements retained the fluid efficiency that had made him one of the best in their unit. His dark eyes scanned the hall with professional assessment before settling on Michael with a hint of warmth. Reynolds, Jason acknowledged, approaching with measured steps. You look like hell. Good to see you too, Michael replied, the familiarity of their banter a brief respite from the tension of the past 12 hours. Jason's gaze moved to Sophie, his expression softening. Hey there, Squirt. You've grown since I saw you last. Hi, Uncle Jason, Sophie offered a small smile. Jason turned his attention to Rebecca, immediately assessing her as the one needing protection. His eyes took in her borrowed clothes, her nervous posture, the way she stayed close to Michael, all data points in his security evaluation. Miss Morgan, Jason Reeves, I'll be helping ensure your safety today. Rebecca nodded, clearly relieved at the additional support. Thank you for coming. Michael filled me in on the basics, Jason said, turning back to Michael. Harrison Industries, money laundering, FBI witness. What he didn't explain is why you're involved. Wrong place, wrong time, Michael replied. Sophie and I walked into a situation at the North Star last night. Couldn't walk away. Jason's expression tightened, and Sophie saw it all. Michael nodded grimly. Unfortunately. Jason shook his head slightly. Let's make sure she doesn't see any more violence today. He gestured toward a secluded corner of the hall. I've secured that area. Good visibility of all approaches, quick access to 2 exits, and enough cover if things go sideways. As they moved toward the designated spot, Jason briefed Michael on his preliminary security assessment. I've been watching the approaches since 0730. No obvious surveillance yet, but Harrison's people will be thorough. They'll have the building under observation before your FBI contact arrives. Speaking of which, Michael said, lowering his voice so Sophie wouldn't overhear, I'm not entirely convinced the FBI is secure. Someone compromised Rebecca's safe house location. Jason nodded, unsurprised. Harrison has the resources to buy information. Could be anyone from a janitor to a senior agent. He paused. That's why I want you watching Agent Foster when she arrives. See if she's alone or if she brings backup. Watch for any communication that might suggest a setup. Copy that, Michael agreed. I'll position myself in the south gallery. Good vantage point, plenty of shadow. They reached the corner Jason had selected, where he had already arranged a small table and chairs, inconspicuous enough to blend with the event preparations elsewhere in the hall. Sophie took a seat, pulling out a small coloring book and pencils that Margaret had provided, while Rebecca remained standing, too anxious to sit. What time is your contact due? Jason asked. 9:01, Michael replied, checking his watch. It was now 8:15. I'll start my surveillance circuit at 8:30. Check all entrances, identify potential hostiles. I'll maintain communication, Jason decided, touching a small earpiece. Channel 3 on your receiver. Michael nodded, retrieving a similar earpiece from the small go bag Jason had brought. The familiar routine of preparing for an operation settled his mind, bringing clarity and focus. This might not be a military mission, but the principles remain the same. Identify threats, secure the principal, maintain escape routes, anticipate enemy actions. As Jason departed to begin his surveillance, Michael turned to Rebecca. When Agent Foster arrives, let me do the talking initially. I need to assess whether she's compromised. How will you know? Rebecca asked. Inconsistencies in her story, unusual body language, unnatural phrasing, Michael explained. Sam and I have worked enough counterintelligence to spot the signs. Rebecca nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her expression. And if she is compromised? Then we move to Plan B, Michael said simply. Get you to a different federal agency, maybe the U.S. Marshals. They have more experience with witness protection. Anyway, Michael turned his attention to Sophie, who was coloring quietly, her small face set in concentration. Despite everything she'd witnessed, she maintained a resilience that continually amazed him. Rachel's daughter through and through. That's beautiful, Soph, he commented, glancing at her drawing, a lighthouse on a rocky shore, detailed with remarkable skill for her age. Sophie looked up with a small smile. It's our special word. I thought if I drew it, it might keep us safe. Michael's throat tightened with emotion. That's a wonderful idea. The next 40 minutes passed in tense vigilance. Jason reported regularly through the earpiece, noting the arrival of more event staff, a security guard beginning his rounds, and an elderly couple who entered to inquire about an upcoming community dance. Nothing suspicious, but Michael maintained his alertness, knowing how quickly situations could change. At 8:57, Jason's voice came through the earpiece again. Movement at the north entrance. Black SUV, government plates. 2 occupants exiting, female in a suit, likely your Agent Foster, and a companion, armed, standard-issue shoulder holster. They're approaching the main doors now. Michael straightened, his senses sharpening. Copy that. Keep eyes on the companion. He turned to Rebecca. They're here. Stay with Sophie. If anything happens, anything at all that feels wrong, take her through that maintenance door we discussed. Rebecca nodded, moving closer to Sophie, who looked up from her drawing with sudden concern. It's okay, sweetheart, Michael assured her. I'm just going to talk to the people who are going to help Miss Rebecca. Stay here with her. Be careful, Dad, Sophie urged. Always am, he replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Michael moved toward the center of the hall, positioning himself where he had clear sight lines to all entrances, while maintaining a tactical distance from columns that could provide cover if needed. His injured ribs protested as he adjusted his stance, but he pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the approaching figures. Agent Diana Foster entered first, her bearing professional and alert. In her early 40s, she moved with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her suit conservative but well-tailored. Behind her walked a man Michael immediately identified as another agent, late 30s, athletic build, the slight bulge of a shoulder holster visible beneath his jacket. "Mr. Reynolds," Foster called, approaching with hand extended. "Special Agent Diana Foster. Thank you for contacting us. We've been very concerned about Ms. Morgan's safety." Michael shook her hand, studying her face for any signs of deception. "You'll understand if I'm cautious, Agent Foster. Someone compromised Ms. Morgan's safe house location." Foster's expression tightened. "Yes, we're investigating that breach. It's our top priority, along with Miss Morgan's safety, of course." "And your colleague?" Michael nodded toward the male agent. "Special Agent Tom Ramirez," Foster introduced. "My partner on this case." Ramirez nodded but remained several paces back, his eyes continuously scanning the hall. Standard protection protocol. His positioning suggested professional training, but something about his surveillance pattern struck Michael as odd. He was paying more attention to the maintenance doors than the main entrances, as if he already knew which escape routes were most likely. "Is Ms. Morgan here?" Foster asked, her tone carefully neutral. "She is," Michael confirmed, "but before I bring you to her, I need some assurances." Foster's eyebrow raised slightly. "What kind of assurances, Mr. Reynolds?" "Information," Michael replied. "How did Harrison's men find Ms. Morgan at her safe house?" Foster hesitated, exchanging a glance with Ramirez that lasted a fraction too long. "We're still investigating that breach. Our initial assessment suggests they may have followed one of our agents during a routine supply delivery." Jason's voice came through Michael's earpiece, too low for the agents to hear. "Ramirez keeps checking his watch, expecting something, and there's movement outside. Two men just pulled up in a sedan, business attire but military bearing, taking positions with sight lines to both main exits." Michael maintained his outward composure, but internally his alert level elevated. Something wasn't right. "That's interesting," he said to Foster, watching her reaction closely, "because according to Ms. Morgan, her safe house location was known only to you and two other agents. No supply deliveries were scheduled." Foster's expression flickered, a momentary tightening around the eyes that betrayed surprise. "Ms. Morgan might be confused. The trauma of last night? She's quite clear," Michael interrupted. "Just as she's clear about the documents she provided you 3 weeks ago, the ones detailing Harrison's payments to local officials." Another subtle tell, Foster's left hand tensed slightly. "Yes, of course, those documents are the cornerstone of our case, including the offshore account records." Michael allowed himself a thin smile. "That's odd because Ms. Morgan never mentioned offshore accounts to me. I made that detail up just now." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Foster's professional demeanor hardened, while Ramirez's hand moved subtly toward his holster. "I think we've wasted enough time, Mr. Reynolds," Foster said, her voice taking on a colder edge. "Where is Ms. Morgan?" "We've got a situation," Jason's urgent voice came through the earpiece. "4 more hostiles just entered through the South Service corridor. They're spreading out, establishing a perimeter. This is a trap." Michael had suspected as much from the moment Foster failed his test, but hearing confirmation still sent a surge of adrenaline through his system. His mind raced through options, calculating risks and escape routes. It seemed they had a problem. "Agent Foster," he said calmly, "you're working for Harrison." Foster's facade dropped entirely. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Reynolds. Harrison has reach you can't imagine. The smart play is to give us Morgan and walk away with your daughter." The mention of Sophie sent ice through Michael's veins, but he maintained his composure. "Not going to happen," he said evenly. Foster sighed as if disappointed. "I was hoping to resolve this quietly." She glanced at Ramirez, who was now openly reaching for his weapon. "Take him. Find the woman." Michael had anticipated this moment from the second they'd entered. As Ramirez drew his gun, Michael was already in motion, closing the distance between them with explosive speed. Years of close-quarters combat training took over as he executed a disarming technique, grabbing Ramirez's wrist and twisting sharply while delivering a precise strike to the nerve cluster in the agent's forearm. The gun clattered to the floor as Ramirez gasped in pain. Michael followed through with a sweeping leg takedown that sent the man crashing to the marble floor. A controlled strike to Ramirez's temple rendered him unconscious before he could recover. Foster was reaching into her jacket, presumably for her own weapon, but Michael was already pivoting toward her. Before she could draw, he closed the distance, pinning her arm and using her own momentum to spin her around and secure her in a hold that immobilized without causing permanent damage. "Harrison underestimated you," Foster hissed, struggling against his grip. "People usually do," Michael replied grimly. Jason's voice crackled through the earpiece again. "Hostiles converging on your position, 30 seconds max. Get to the extraction point." Michael secured Foster with a zip tie from his pocket, standard equipment in his personal kit, and did the same for the unconscious Ramirez. "The authorities will be interested to hear how federal agents conspired with a criminal enterprise," Michael told Foster as he finished binding her hands. "I suspect your career in law enforcement is over." Not waiting for her response, Michael sprinted back toward where he'd left Sophie and Rebecca, his body protesting the sudden exertion. When he rounded the corner, his heart nearly stopped. The table was empty, the coloring book abandoned. But before panic could set in, he spotted movement near the maintenance door they'd discussed earlier. Rebecca was ushering Sophie through, having recognized the danger themselves. "Smart woman," Michael muttered, changing direction to intercept them in the maintenance corridor. He burst through the door just as Rebecca and Sophie disappeared around a corner. Catching up to them in a few long strides, he found Sophie wide-eyed with fear, but still moving purposefully. "Dad!" she cried, reaching for him. "It's okay, kiddo," he assured her, squeezing her hand briefly. "But we need to keep moving, fast and quiet. Remember?" Rebecca's face was pale but determined. "I saw men with guns entering from the other side of the hall. I remembered what you said about the maintenance door." "You did exactly right," Michael confirmed, guiding them deeper into the service corridors. "The FBI agents were compromised. Harrison has more reach than we realized." "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight with fear. "Secondary extraction point," Michael replied. "Jason's meeting us there." The service corridors formed a maze throughout the old building, but Michael navigated with confidence, having committed the layout to memory from the keys David had provided. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit passages, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as they took a route their pursuers wouldn't anticipate. Sophie kept pace remarkably well, her small hand clutching Michael's tightly. The fear in her eyes was tempered with trust, absolute faith that her father would keep her safe. That trust was both a comfort and a terrifying responsibility. They reached a metal door marked Utility Access, which Michael unlocked with one of the keys David had provided. Beyond lay a narrow passage that led to the building's original coal delivery chute, now repurposed as an emergency exit. "Through here," Michael directed, helping Sophie navigate the confined space. "It leads to the loading dock on the east side." As they emerged into the morning sunlight, Jason was already waiting beside an unmarked van, engine running. His expression was grim, a thin line of blood trickling from a cut above his eye, suggesting he'd encountered resistance. "3 hostiles neutralized on the south side," he reported as they approached. "Non-lethal takedowns, but they won't stay down forever. We need to move." Michael helped Sophie into the van's back seat, ensuring her seatbelt was secure, then turned to assist Rebecca. "Where are we heading?" he asked Jason as they all climbed in. "Off the grid," Jason replied, pulling away from the loading dock with controlled urgency. "I've got a hunting cabin in the mountains. No one knows about it except my ex-wife, and she hasn't spoken to me in 15 years. As they navigated away from the train station, taking an indirect route to avoid potential pursuit, Michael finally allowed himself a moment to process what had just happened. The FBI was compromised at a high level. Harrison's influence extended further than they'd imagined. And now they were fugitives, running from both criminals and the authorities who should have been protecting them. Sophie leaned against him, exhaustion and stress finally taking their toll. Her eyes drooped despite her obvious effort to stay alert. "It's okay to rest, kiddo," Michael said softly, stroking her hair. "I've got you." As Sophie drifted into an uneasy sleep, Michael met Rebecca's gaze across the van. Her expression held the same question that was troubling him. What now? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. They needed a new plan, one that accounted for Harrison's extensive reach and influence. The path forward would be dangerous, but Michael Sullivan had never backed down from protecting the innocent. Not in Afghanistan, and certainly not now with his daughter's safety at stake. Jason turned the van onto a mountain road, leaving the town of Pine Ridge behind. "We've got about 2 hours to the cabin," he informed them. "Time to regroup and figure out our next move." Michael nodded, his mind already analyzing the situation, calculating risks and options. Harrison might have powerful connections and seemingly unlimited resources, but he'd made a critical error. He'd threatened Michael Reynolds' family, and Michael would make sure that was a mistake Harrison would regret for the rest of his life. The van climbed steadily into the mountains, the familiar landscape of Colorado receding behind them. Whatever came next, Michael was certain of one thing. This was no longer just about protecting a witness. It had become personal. And when Michael Reynolds took something personally, the outcome was inevitable. Pine-scented mountain air filled the van as they climbed higher into the Colorado Rockies. The winding road narrowed, transitioning from asphalt to gravel as they left civilization behind. Sophie had fallen asleep against Michael's shoulder, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Rebecca gazed out the window, her expression reflecting both wonder at the magnificent landscape and anxiety about their uncertain future. "Almost there," Jason announced, guiding the vehicle around a particularly sharp bend. "5 more minutes." Michael nodded, his tactical mind already mapping the terrain. The increasing isolation worked both for and against them. Harder for Harrison's men to find, but equally difficult to summon help if needed. His military training had taught him to assess all variables, and right now the equation contained too many unknowns. "How secure is this place?" he asked Jason. "Very. Purchased through a shell company years ago. No paperwork connecting it to me. Solar power, well water, satellite communications I can control, stocked with enough supplies for 2 weeks." Jason's voice carried the confidence of someone who had planned for contingencies. "I come up here 4 times a year, just enough to maintain the property without establishing a pattern." The road ended at a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Nestled against the tree line sat a modest log cabin, its weathered exterior blending naturally with the surroundings. To the untrained eye, it might appear neglected, but Michael recognized the strategic advantages immediately. Clear sight lines in all directions, multiple escape routes through the forest, a raised position that would make an approach from below easily detectable. "Nice setup," Michael commented as Jason parked behind the structure, concealing the vehicle from the road. "Paranoia has its benefits," Jason replied with a grim smile. Michael gently woke Sophie, who blinked in confusion before remembering their situation. Her face immediately tensed, looking to her father for reassurance. "We're safe here, kiddo," Michael assured her. "Uncle Jason's special hideout." They entered the cabin, which proved far more sophisticated than its rustic exterior suggested. The main room featured comfortable but practical furniture, a wood-burning stove, and a modernized kitchen. 2 bedrooms branched off from the central space, along with a surprisingly well-appointed bathroom. Most impressive was the communication center tucked into one corner. Multiple screens, satellite equipment, and what appeared to be military-grade encryption hardware. "Welcome to the fortress," Jason said, locking the reinforced door behind them. "Not exactly the Ritz, but it'll keep us alive." While Sophie explored the cabin with cautious curiosity, Jason activated the security systems, motion sensors around the perimeter, cameras covering all approaches, and what Michael recognized as a signal jammer that would prevent any unauthorized communications within a half-mile radius. "Let me see that shoulder," Jason said to Michael, noticing his friend's stiffness. Michael removed his shirt, revealing Margaret's neat bandaging. Jason examined the knife wound with professional detachment, checking for signs of infection. "Clean enough. Needs stitches, but the butterfly closures are holding. Ribs cracked?" "At least 2, Michael confirmed. Manageable." Jason nodded, familiar with Michael's high-pain threshold from their service days. "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom. Military grade. Help yourself." Rebecca had been standing near the window, watching the forest with evident anxiety. She turned to face them, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "What happens now?" she asked. "The trial starts Monday morning." Jason gestured for everyone to gather around the dining table. "First, we assess what we know. Harrison's reach extends into the FBI, at least to Agent Foster's level. That means normal channels are compromised. We need to determine how high the corruption goes. Her direct supervisor, The field office director? We can't trust any of them, Rebecca stated flatly. Not after what happened at the train station. Agreed, Michael said. But there must be legitimate authorities we can approach. U.S. Marshal Service, maybe. They handle witness protection independently from the FBI. Jason considered this possibility. Possibly, but how do we make contact without exposing ourselves? Harrison's resources are substantial. He'll have people watching all official channels. Michael kneeled beside Sophie, examining her for any injuries or signs of trauma. Finding none beyond the expected exhaustion and anxiety, he turned his attention to a more immediate concern, her emotional state. "How are you holding up, Soph?" he asked quietly. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted, her voice small but steady. "But I remember what you and Mom always said about being brave." Michael pulled her into a gentle hug, careful of his injured ribs. "You're the bravest person I know, kiddo. We're going to get through this." He looked up at Jason and Rebecca. "Sophie needs rest, and we all need to regroup. Let's take an hour to recover, then formulate a plan." Jason nodded. "I'll start working some back channels. I've maintained certain unofficial contacts from our service days, people who operate outside normal bureaucratic constraints." "Black Ops?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. "More like gray, retired special forces who now work in various agencies. People who wish to me favors and whose integrity I trust implicitly." Jason began typing on one of the keyboards. "Give me an hour to make some secure inquiries." Michael guided Sophie to one of the bedrooms where she curled up with her teddy bear. He sat beside her until she fell into an exhausted sleep, her small face finally relaxing as her breathing deepened. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, marveling as he often did at her resilience. Many children would be completely unraveled by the events of the past 18 hours. Yet Sophie maintained a quiet courage that both heartened and saddened him. No 8-year-old should need to be this brave. When he returned to the main room, he found Rebecca staring at a map of the surrounding area that Jason had laid out on the table. She looked up as Michael approached. "Your daughter is amazing," she said softly. "Most adults wouldn't handle this situation as well as she has." "She's had practice," Michael replied, the weight of that statement hanging between them. "Losing her mother taught her about survival, about adapting to painful circumstances. I wish she hadn't needed to learn those lessons so young, but I'm grateful for her strength now." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'm sorry for bringing this danger into your lives." "You didn't," Michael countered firmly. "Harrison did. You had the courage to stand up against corruption, to do what's right despite the risk. That's something I want Sophie to see and learn from." Their conversation was interrupted by Jason's voice from the communications center. "I've made contact with someone who might help. Thomas Gaines, former Army intelligence, now with the Justice Department's Internal Affairs Division." Michael and Rebecca moved to join him. "Internal Affairs?" Michael questioned. "If there's corruption in the FBI, he's exactly the person we want investigating," Jason explained. "He was part of the team that exposed the McCarthy scandal 3 years ago. Remember that corruption ring inside Homeland Security? Cost him a promotion, but he did the right thing." "Can he be trusted?" Michael asked, the question automatic after the betrayal by Foster. "As much as anyone," Jason replied. "He's agreed to meet us, but not here. Neutral location tomorrow morning." "Where?" Michael asked. "Granite Falls National Park Visitor Center. Public enough to deter violence, remote enough to spot surveillance. He'll come alone." Michael considered the location. "Good choice. We should arrive early, secure the approaches." "My thoughts exactly," Jason agreed. "For tonight, we stay here. Cabin secure, and I've got enough hardware to hold off a small army if necessary." He nodded toward a gun safe mounted to the wall, though his tone suggested he'd prefer to avoid that scenario. As evening approached, they established a watch rotation. Michael insisted on taking the first shift despite his injuries. While Jason showed Rebecca and Sophie to their quarters, he settled into a chair with clear sight lines to all approaches, a rifle across his knees. The familiar weight of the weapon brought back memories of countless night watches in hostile territory, though this time the precious cargo he protected wasn't classified intelligence or military hardware, but his daughter's future. The forest grew quiet as darkness fell, only the occasional call of an owl or rustle of wind through pine needles breaking the silence. Michael used the solitude to process everything that had happened since their late-night milk run. Logan's sacrifice continued to trouble him, A man who had chosen the wrong path but found redemption in his final moments. Michael wondered about Logan's daughter, Lily. Would she ever know that her father had died protecting another man's child? Some truths were perhaps better left untold. His thoughts turned to Rebecca Morgan. Her courage in standing against Harrison's corruption had cost her everything. Her career, her home, her safety. Yet she remained determined to testify, to see justice done regardless of personal cost. That kind of moral conviction was rare, particularly when facing such dangerous opposition. The cabin door opened quietly as Rebecca herself stepped onto the porch, wrapping a borrowed jacket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, settling into the chair beside him. "Too much adrenaline still in my system." Michael nodded. "Common reaction. It'll catch up with you eventually." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the vast canopy of stars providing a spectacular view absent from city skies. "I never thanked you properly," Rebecca finally said. "You and Sophie could have died because of me." "We were in the wrong place at the wrong time," Michael replied. "Or the right place at the right time from your perspective." She turned to face him. "Why did you help me? You could have walked away, taken Sophie and left. Most people would have." Michael considered the question, though the answer seemed self-evident to him. "Because it was the right thing to do, and I'm trying to teach Sophie that standing up for what's right matters, especially when it's difficult." "Your wife would be proud," Rebecca said softly. "Sophie mentioned her earlier, said she passed away 3 years ago." "Car accident," Michael confirmed, the familiar ache returning. "Drunk driver crossed the center line. Rachel died at the scene." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, genuine compassion in her voice. "It must have been devastating." "It was," Michael acknowledged, "still is sometimes. But Sophie needed me to keep going, so I did." He rarely discussed Rachel with anyone outside family, yet something about this moment, the quiet night, the shared danger they'd faced, made the conversation feel natural. "What was she like?" Rebecca asked. A small smile touched Michael's lips. "Brilliant, compassionate, stubborn as hell when she believed in something. She was an environmental attorney, specialized in protecting Colorado's watersheds from industrial pollution. We met when she sued a client of mine." "She sued you?" Rebecca sounded surprised. "No, though she threatened to," Michael chuckled at the memory. "I was doing security consulting after leaving the SEALs. Corporate client wanted to build a factory upstream from a protected area. Rachel represented the conservation group opposing the project. She demolished our security presentations so thoroughly that I ended up agreeing with her, and then I asked her to coffee. She refused. At first, I sent her research supporting her position that my client hadn't disclosed. She reconsidered the coffee. The memory remained crystal clear, Rachel's suspicious expression slowly warming as she realized he was genuinely interested in environmental protection, not just in her. "Sounds like an exceptional woman," Rebecca said. "She was," Michael agreed. "Sophie has her spirit, same determination, same moral compass." Rebecca nodded toward the cabin. "Sophie's amazing. Most children would be traumatized after what she's been through, but she seems so resilient." "She's had practice," Michael said quietly. "Losing her mother taught her about survival, about adapting to painful circumstances. I wish she hadn't needed to learn those lessons so young, but I'm grateful for her strength now." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence again. Eventually, Rebecca returned inside to attempt sleep, leaving Michael alone with the night and his thoughts. When Jason relieved him several hours later, Michael checked on Sophie before settling onto the couch for his own rest. She slept peacefully, teddy bear clutched to her chest, one small hand outflung as if reaching for something in her dreams. He adjusted her blanket gently before retreating, knowing they both needed whatever rest they could manage before tomorrow's challenges. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through pine branches and the rich aroma of coffee permeating the cabin. Jason had prepared a substantial breakfast, explaining that they should eat well while they could. The meeting with Thomas Gaines was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m., giving them ample time to plan their approach. "We'll take my backup vehicle," Jason explained, pouring coffee for the adults. "It's a Jeep, better suited for the terrain and unknown to anyone who might be tracking us." "What's our contingency if things go wrong?" Michael asked, ever the tactician. "3 fallback positions, Emergency extraction routes from each. Jason spread a map across the table, indicating the locations. If we get separated, rendezvous here at sunset. He pointed to a marker labeled Eagle's Nest, apparently a rock formation overlooking the valley. And if Gaines isn't alone? Rebecca asked, the worry evident in her voice. Then we don't engage, Michael answered firmly. First sign of an ambush, we withdraw, no heroics. Jason nodded agreement. The meeting point gives us maximum visibility. We'll spot any surveillance long before reaching the visitor center. They departed at 9:15, the Jeep handling the rough mountain roads with ease. Sophie sat between Michael and Rebecca in the back seat, her backpack filled with snacks and activities Margaret had thoughtfully provided. Michael maintained vigilant watch for any signs of pursuit, but the journey proceeded without incident. Granite Falls National Park spread across thousands of acres of pristine wilderness. The visitor center occupied a strategic position near the park entrance, a rustic yet modern structure of stone and timber that offered educational displays about local wildlife and geology. This early in the morning, only a few tourists wandered the parking lot, most preparing for day hikes into the surrounding mountains. Jason parked with clear sight lines to all approaches, leaving the keys in the ignition for a quick departure if necessary. They entered the center as a group, positioning themselves near the topographical map display that offered both good visibility and proximity to the rear exit. At precisely 10 o'clock a.m., a man in hiking attire entered the center, mid-50s, trim build, with the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to assessing threats. He carried no visible weapon, but Michael noted the slight bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his lightweight jacket. Thomas Gaines moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent decades in the field, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on their group. Jason, he acknowledged with a nod. Been a while, Tom, Jason returned evenly. Appreciate you coming. Gaines's attention shifted to Michael, recognition dawning in his expression. Reynolds, right? Afghanistan, 2013, Operation Iron Shield. Michael nodded, somewhat surprised. You were involved? Intelligence support, never met in person, but I reviewed the after-action reports. Good work under impossible circumstances. Gaines turned to Rebecca. And you must be Ms. Morgan. You've caused quite a stir. Not intentionally, Rebecca replied. Gaines smiled slightly. Whistleblowers rarely do. His expression grew serious as he addressed the group. Let's find somewhere more private to talk. They moved to an outdoor seating area, deliberately choosing a table distant from other visitors. Michael positioned Sophie with her coloring book at an adjacent table, close enough to watch but far enough to avoid overhearing potentially troubling information. Here's where we stand, Gaines began without preamble. The FBI Denver field office has officially reported Rebecca Morgan as missing from protective custody. They're claiming concern for her safety, but unofficially, there's significant worry about the Harrison Industries case falling apart without her testimony. Agent Foster is compromised, Michael stated flatly. Almost certainly, Gaines agreed. Based on what Jason told me, she's likely on Harrison's payroll. The question is, how far the corruption extends. And you can help determine that? Rebecca asked. Gaines nodded. Internal Affairs has had concerns about the Denver office for months. Nothing concrete enough for formal investigation, but suspicious patterns of case outcomes favoring certain influential parties. Your situation provides the leverage we need to launch a full inquiry. How does that help Ms. Morgan testify on Monday? Michael pressed. Harrison's people won't stop coming after her. That's where it gets complicated, Gaines admitted. Normally, witness security would fall to the Marshal Service. But given the apparent leak within federal law enforcement, traditional channels might be compromised. So what's the alternative? Jason asked. A secure facility operated by my division, off the books, used for high-value witnesses in sensitive corruption cases. Gaines leaned forward. We can protect Ms. Morgan until her testimony, then transition her to formal witness protection afterward. Michael exchanged glance with Jason, both men evaluating the proposal with ingrained skepticism. How do we know your operation isn't compromised as well? Michael asked. Fair question, Gaines acknowledged. The facility reports directly to the Deputy Attorney General. Only 3 people know its location, and all communications are encrypted using protocols that change daily. It's as secure as anything in the federal system. And how would we get there? Rebecca asked. I have transportation standing by. Small airstrip 20 miles from here. Private plane with trusted pilot. Gaines checked his watch. Wheels up in 2 hours if you agree. I need assurance, Michael said firmly, about Sophie's safety and what happens after Rebecca testifies. Gaines nodded. The child would come with us, of course. As for aftermath, once Mr. Morgan's testimony is recorded, we can offer full witness protection, new identity, relocation, financial support, standard protocol for high-risk witnesses. A sudden tension in Jason's posture caught Michael's attention. His friend's gaze had shifted toward the visitor center entrance, where two men in casual hiking gear had just entered. Nothing about them appeared immediately threatening, yet something had triggered Jason's alarm. Tom, Jason said quietly, those two who just walked in, friends of yours? Gaines didn't turn to look, a telling restraint. No, my people know to maintain distance until contacted. Michael casually shifted position to get a better view. The men were methodically scanning the center, their movements too coordinated for ordinary tourists. His combat instincts hummed a warning. We've got company, he murmured, making eye contact with Sophie and giving the subtle hand signal they'd practiced. 3 fingers tapped against his leg. Immediately, she began gathering her belongings, understanding the need for a quick exit. How did they find us? Rebecca whispered, tension evident in her voice. Questions later, Jason replied tersely. East exit, 30 seconds. Gaines reached slowly into his jacket, producing not a weapon but a small electronic device. Signal tracker, he explained, scanning their group. Someone's carrying a beacon. The device emitted a soft ping as it passed near Rebecca, who looked bewildered. That's impossible. I left everything behind at the safe house. Clothing? Michael asked sharply. Borrowed from Margaret's granddaughter, she confirmed. Gaines focused the scanner more precisely, homing in on the signal. It's in your shoe. Rebecca's expression transformed from confusion to anger. The boots, Foster insisted I wear them at the safe house, said they were protocol approved for witness security. Clever, Jason muttered. Tracking device embedded in the heel activated remotely. They've been following you since you left the North Star. The men at the entrance had noticed their huddled conversation and were moving with new purpose toward their position. Michael saw one speak into a concealed microphone, calling for backup almost certainly. We need to move, Michael stated, rising casually as if simply continuing their tour. Sophie, remember our game at the train station? Same rules apply. Sophie nodded solemnly, taking his outstretched hand. Back exit leads to a maintenance trail, Gaines informed them quietly. Half-mile to the ranger station. I have people there. Rebecca, leave the boots now, Jason instructed. She quickly slipped them off, leaving them under the table as they began moving toward the exit. Michael kept Sophie close, his body positioned to shield her if necessary. They maintained a measured pace, quick enough for purpose but not so fast as to broadcast alarm. They were halfway to the exit when one of the men called out, Federal agents! Ms. Morgan, please remain where you are. Michael didn't break stride, knowing the claim was almost certainly false. Harrison's men had found them, using Rebecca as a human tracking beacon. The tactical situation deteriorated further when 2 more men entered through the exit they had been approaching, effectively boxing them in. Gaines made a swift decision. Follow my lead, he murmured, then raised his voice. Justice Department, Internal Affairs. These individuals are under my protection. Stand down immediately. He displayed official credentials, creating momentary confusion among the pursuers. It was enough disruption for Jason to move, sliding smoothly between display cases to approach the nearest threat from behind. What followed was a carefully choreographed extraction that spoke to years of professional training. While Gaines maintained the verbal confrontation, drawing attention and creating confusion about jurisdictional authority, Jason neutralized one threat with a precise strike to the brainstem that rendered the man unconscious without visible violence. Michael simultaneously guided Sophie and Rebecca behind the cover of a large topographical display, positioning them for the quickest route to the alternative exit. A family of tourists unwittingly provided additional cover, their noisy entrance and excited chatter about hiking trails creating further distraction. Michael seized the opportunity, leading Sophie and Rebecca toward the side exit while Gaines continued his official-sounding demands for identification from the remaining agents. They slipped outside into bright mountain sunshine, quickly moving around the building toward the parking area where Jason's Jeep waited. Michael helped Sophie into the vehicle, then turned to assist Rebecca, who was moving awkwardly in sock feet across the gravel lot. Jason and Gaines? She asked anxiously. They'll follow their own extraction route, Michael explained, starting the engine. Rendezvous at the fallback position. The Jeep roared to life just as shouting erupted from inside the visitor center. Michael pulled away with controlled urgency, avoiding the main park exit where reinforcements might be waiting. Instead, he followed a service road that curved around the facility and into the dense forest beyond. Where are we going? Sophie asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Remember the eagle's nest that Uncle Jason showed us on the map? That's where we'll meet him and Mr. Gaines. Michael navigated the increasingly rough terrain with precision, grateful for the Jeep's four-wheel drive capability. Will the bad men follow us? Sophie's question held no panic, only practical concern. They'll try, Michael acknowledged honestly, but this vehicle doesn't leave much of a trail, and I know how to disappear in terrain like this. Indeed, Michael had specialized in mountain operations during his final years with the SEALs, training extensively in the Colorado Rockies. This landscape offered both challenges and advantages that he understood intimately. He followed game trails and dry creek beds, paths that wouldn't appear on standard maps and would be difficult to track. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, Michael pulled the Jeep into a natural formation of boulders that provided concealment from both ground and air observation. They would continue on foot from here, reducing their signature even further. We'll need to hike about 2 miles, he informed Rebecca, who was examining her feet with concern. The terrain gets steeper ahead. I'll manage, she assured him, though the prospect of hiking barefoot through mountain wilderness clearly worried her. Michael rummaged in the back of the Jeep, finding an emergency pack Jason had prepared. Inside were basic survival supplies, including a pair of hiking socks and lightweight trail runners that would fit Rebecca reasonably well. Jason thinks of everything, he commented, handing her the footwear. Thank goodness, Rebecca replied with evident relief. As she laced up the shoes, she asked, do you think Gaines is legitimate? Could this be another trap? Michael considered the question carefully. Jason trusts him, which carries significant weight, and his actions back there weren't those of someone working with Harrison's men. He checked his watch. We'll know more when we rendezvous. With Sophie between them, they began the hike toward Eagle's Nest. The trail climbed steadily through pine forest, occasionally opening to reveal spectacular views of the valley below. Under different circumstances, it would have been an enjoyable family outing. Instead, Michael maintained constant vigilance, regularly checking their back trail for signs of pursuit while keeping Sophie's spirits up with impromptu nature lessons. See those marks on the tree? He pointed out to Sophie. That's where a bear has been sharpening its claws. Sophie examined the scarred bark with fascination. Is the bear still around? Probably not nearby, Michael reassured her. Bears usually avoid humans if they can. Unlike Harrison's men, Rebecca observed dryly. Michael smiled at the grim humor. True, bears are generally more reasonable. They reached Eagle's Nest by mid-afternoon, a dramatic rock formation that jutted from the mountainside, offering commanding views in all directions. The natural fortress provided an excellent defensive position with only one obvious approach route that could be easily monitored. Now we wait, Michael said, helping Sophie find a comfortable spot in the shade. He distributed water and energy bars from the pack, ensuring they maintained their strength. The mountain air was cool despite the sunshine, and he wrapped his jacket around Sophie's shoulders as they settled in for what might be a long vigil. An hour passed with no sign of Jason or Gaines. Michael's concern grew with each passing minute, though he maintained a calm demeanor for Sophie's benefit. Rebecca paced the small clearing, alternating between anxiety and determination. If they don't come, what's our next move? She finally asked. We have options, Michael replied, though none were particularly appealing. Return to Jason's cabin, attempt contact through his secure communications, or make our way to Denver independently. Find alternative means to get you to court on Monday. And if Harrison's men find us first? Michael's expression hardened. That won't happen. A subtle disturbance in the forest below caught his attention. Movement too deliberate for wildlife. He motioned for silence, positioning Sophie and Rebecca behind the largest boulder while he observed through a natural gap in the rocks. Two figures emerged from the tree line, moving with the careful precision of trained operators. Relief washed through Michael as he recognized Jason's distinctive gait, with Gaines following close behind. Both men appeared unharmed, though Gaines's hiking jacket was torn at the shoulder. Michael whistled the all-clear signal from their SEAL days. Jason immediately looked up, returning the signal before leading Gaines up the final approach to the nest. Took the scenic road? Michael asked as they rejoined the group. Had to ensure we weren't being followed, Jason explained, catching his breath from the climb. Harrison's men? Michael asked. Definitely not federal agents, Gaines confirmed. Professional contractors, likely ex-military. They backed off after we established that continuing would create unwanted attention. He gestured to a park ranger truck visible in the distance. Actual authorities responded to the disturbance. Harrison's people wouldn't risk direct confrontation with legitimate law enforcement. So what now? Rebecca asked. They know we're in the park. They know we were in the park, Jason corrected. By now, they're establishing search patterns based on standard evasion protocols, but we're not following standard protocols. Gaines nodded in agreement. My extraction plan remains viable. We've repositioned the aircraft to a different airstrip, former mining company property, about 5 miles northeast of here. We can reach it by dusk if we move now. Michael studied the man carefully, still not entirely convinced. Before we go anywhere, I need verification of your credentials, something Harrison's resources couldn't fake. Gaines appeared to appreciate the caution rather than take offense. Reasonable request. He considered for a moment, then addressed Jason. Operation Blackfish, Gulf of Aden 2011. You were extraction team lead when we pulled the CIA asset from the freighter. The extraction code was wintergreen, and you insisted on bringing out the asset's cat despite specific orders against it. Jason's expression softened with recognition. You were monitoring from the AWACS, kept the hostile patrol boats off our position during extraction. The cat's name was Ferdinand, Gaines added with a slight smile. Meanest Siamese I've ever encountered. The specific details of a classified operation, particularly the unofficial aspects that wouldn't appear in formal reports, provided the verification Michael needed. He nodded. Decision made. All right, we follow your extraction plan. He turned to Sophie, who had been listening quietly to the adult conversation. Ready for a little more hiking, kiddo? Sophie straightened her shoulders, her expression serious but determined. Is it going to help, Miss Rebecca? It is, Michael confirmed. Then I'm ready, she declared with the simple courage that continued to amaze him. They departed Eagle's Nest with renewed purpose, following a game trail that Gaines assured them would intersect with an old logging road leading to the airstrip. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees as they made their way northeast, each step bringing them closer to potential safety or another trap. Michael maintained healthy skepticism, but the alternatives were limited, and Gaines had proven himself trustworthy thus far. As they hiked, Gaines filled them in on the broader situation. Harrison's not just facing money laundering charges. Based on the evidence Ms. Morgan uncovered, we've built a RICO case against his entire operation. The corruption extends to 3 city council members, a county judge, and possibly the deputy mayor of Denver. Which explains the extraordinary measures to silence me, Rebecca observed. Exactly, Gaines confirmed. Your testimony is the linchpin. Without it, the case weakens substantially. And after she testifies, Michael asked, what then? Full witness protection, Gaines reiterated. New identity, relocation, financial support to build a new life. Rebecca was quiet for several moments, processing the implications. Everything I know, gone, she finally said, her voice soft but resigned at my career, my friends, my home. But you'll be alive, Jason pointed out practically. There is that, she acknowledged with a rueful smile, and Harrison will face justice. The logging road appeared as promised, a narrow track overgrown with vegetation, but still passable on foot. They increased their pace, aware that daylight was fading and night navigation would significantly complicate their journey. The first sign of the airstrip came as the forest thinned, revealing a narrow valley that nature had begun to reclaim from human development. What had once been a busy mining operation was now largely abandoned, with only the concrete runway and a small hangar remaining functional. A twin-engine Cessna waited on the runway, its pilot performing final pre-flight checks. The aircraft was nondescript with no identifying markings beyond the standard registration numbers, perfectly anonymous for their purposes. Right on a schedule, Gaines observed with satisfaction. As they approached the runway, Michael maintained tactical awareness, scanning for any signs of ambush or surveillance. The area appeared secure, with no unexpected vehicles or personnel visible. Still, years of combat experience had taught him that appearances could be deceiving. The pilot noticed their approach and raised a hand in greeting. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades in cockpits. She continued her methodical exterior inspection as they reached the aircraft. "Tom," she acknowledged Gaines with a nod. "Beautiful evening for flying." "Ellen," he returned. "Thanks for the schedule adjustment." "No problem. Weather's clear all the way to our destination." She glanced at the group, her experienced eyes noting Sophie with particular attention. "First time flying, little one?" Sophie shook her head. "My mom and dad took me to visit Grandma in Florida when I was 5. "Well, this will be a bit different from a commercial flight," Ellen explained kindly. "Smaller, but you can see a lot more. It's like being a bird." Sophie's expression brightened at the comparison. "Can I sit by the window?" "Absolutely," Ellen assured her. "Best seats in the house." The simple interaction further reassured Michael. Ellen's manner with Sophie reflected genuine warmth rather than forced friendliness, another indication that Gaines's operation was legitimate. Professional mercenaries rarely bothered with such authentic human connections. "We should board," Gaines suggested. "I prefer to be airborne before full dark." As they approached the aircraft, Michael placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "You're not coming with us, are you?" Jason shook his head. "Someone needs to manage the back trail, ensure you're not followed. Besides, I've got a cabin to clean up." He smiled slightly. "We SEALs never leave evidence behind." Michael understood the tactical necessity, but still felt reluctance at the separation. Jason had been invaluable throughout this crisis, his skills and resources making survival possible. "Thank you," Michael said simply, extending his hand. "For everything." Jason clasped his hand firmly. "What are old war buddies for?" He knelt to Sophie's level. "Take care of your dad, Squirt. He needs looking after sometimes." Sophie threw her arms around Jason's neck in a fierce hug. "Will we see you again?" "Count on it," Jason promised. "Maybe not right away, but I'll find you. That's what I do." With final farewells exchanged, they boarded the aircraft. Michael helped Sophie with her seatbelt, while Rebecca settled into the seat across the narrow aisle. Gaines joined Ellen in the cockpit, reviewing flight plans and communication protocols. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the fuselage as Ellen began taxi procedures. Through the window, Michael watched Jason's figure grow smaller as the aircraft moved toward the runway threshold. His friend raised a hand in final salute before turning toward the forest, disappearing among the trees as dusk settled over the mountains. "Where are we going, Dad?" Sophie asked, her face pressed to the window as the aircraft accelerated down the runway. "Somewhere safe," Michael assured her, though he himself didn't know their exact destination. Trust remained a carefully rationed commodity, even with Gaines proving helpful thus far. The Cessna lifted smoothly into the evening sky, banking gently as Ellen established their departure heading. Below, the wild landscape of Colorado spread out in magnificent panorama, mountains, forests, rivers, and valleys painted gold by the setting sun. The natural beauty provided stark contrast to the human drama playing out in their lives. As they climbed to cruising altitude, Michael watched Sophie's excitement at the aerial view, grateful for her resilience and adaptability. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as they had since Rachel's death. The journey that had begun with a simple trip for milk had transformed into something far more consequential, not just for their lives, but potentially for justice in an entire community. Rebecca caught his eye from across the aisle, her expression reflecting similar thoughts. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Michael nodded acknowledgement. The path forward remained uncertain, fraught with potential dangers, but they had survived the immediate threat. Monday's testimony might bring resolution or simply transition them to a new chapter of challenges. For now, they were airborne, moving beyond Harrison's immediate reach toward whatever awaited them at journey's end. The aircraft banked again, setting course toward the gathering darkness in the east. Michael settled back in his seat, one arm protectively around Sophie's shoulders. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, But for this moment, surrounded by the peaceful hum of engines and his daughter's quiet wonder at the world below, he allowed himself to hope that the worst had passed. Experience had taught him that such hopes were often premature, but it had also taught him that survival depended as much on maintaining optimism as on tactical skill. Rachel had understood that essential truth, imparting it to both him and Sophie. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to continue despite it. As night embraced the aircraft, carrying them toward an uncertain future, Michael Reynolds renewed his silent promise to his late wife. He would protect their daughter. He would stand for what was right. And somehow, they would find their way through this wilderness of danger to whatever new life awaited on the other side. The flight lasted just over an hour, taking them deeper into the Rocky Mountains, to a private airfield nestled in a secluded valley. As they descended, Michael spotted a compound below, a cluster of buildings surrounded by a perimeter fence, floodlights illuminating the area with harsh clarity. "What is this place?" he asked Gaines as they prepared for landing. "We call it Haven," Gaines replied. "Former training facility repurposed for witness security in sensitive cases. Self-contained, staffed by vetted personnel, communications isolated from standard networks." The Cessna touched down smoothly on the well-maintained runway. As they taxied toward a hangar, Michael noted the security measures: surveillance cameras, motion sensors, armed personnel at strategic points. The protection was substantial, but he couldn't help wondering if it was intended to keep threats out or witnesses in. "Welcome to your temporary home," Gaines said as they disembarked. "You'll be safe here until Monday's hearing." A woman in a tailored suit approached them, tablet in hand. "Mr. Gaines, everything's prepared as requested. Quarters are ready, and medical personnel are standing by for evaluation." "Thank you, Sarah," Gaines replied. "This is Rebecca Morgan, our key witness, along with Michael Reynolds and his daughter Sophie. They've had a difficult 48 hours. Sarah nodded sympathetically. "We'll make them as comfortable as possible. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your accommodations." The compound was efficiently organized with residential quarters, medical facilities, and a command center housed in separate buildings. Their assigned quarters were simple but comfortable, two adjoining rooms equipped with basic necessities. "You should all get some rest," Gaines suggested. "Tomorrow we'll brief you on security protocols for Monday's court appearance. The U.S. Marshal Service will handle the actual transport and courtroom security, but we'll coordinate the handoff." After Gaines and Sarah departed, Michael conducted his own security assessment of the quarters. Old habits died hard, especially after the events of the past 2 days. The rooms appeared secure, with no obvious surveillance devices, though he suspected monitoring systems were in place throughout the facility. Sophie explored the space with cautious curiosity, the events of the past 48 hours having heightened her natural wariness. Finding a small shelf of books and games, she settled onto the couch with a puzzle, the familiar activity providing comfort amid so much uncertainty. "Do you think they're really on our side?" Rebecca asked quietly, joining Michael by the window. "So far, everything checks out," he replied. "But we stay vigilant until this is over." The next day brought a flurry of activity as they prepared for Monday's court appearance. Gaines arranged for Rebecca to review her testimony with the prosecuting attorney via secure video link, while Michael and Sophie were given a tour of the facility's secure areas. By Sunday evening, the plan was firmly established. Rebecca would be transported to the federal courthouse under heavy security, her testimony scheduled for early Monday morning. Michael and Sophie would follow in a separate vehicle, their presence requested by the prosecution to establish the circumstances of Logan's death, another nail in Harrison's coffin. "Try to get some sleep," Michael told Rebecca as they finished their evening meal. "Tomorrow's going to be intense." "I'm not sure I can," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Harrison's men at the store, at the train station, in the park. It's like they're always just one step behind us." "But they never caught us," Michael reminded Hickram, "and after tomorrow they never will." Rebecca managed a small smile. "You sound very confident." "I've learned to focus on what I can control," Michael said. "Right now, that means being ready for tomorrow. The rest will sort itself out." As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, she asked the question that had been on her mind since their arrival. "After tomorrow, will we go home, Dad?" Michael considered his answer carefully. "I'm not sure, kiddo. It might not be safe right away, but eventually, yes. What about Miss Rebecca? Will she come with us? No, sweetheart. After she testifies, she'll need to start a new life somewhere else, with a new name to stay safe. Sophie frowned, processing this information. That's sad. I like her. Me too, Michael admitted. But she's doing something very brave. And sometimes being brave means making sacrifices. Like Mom always said, Sophie murmured sleepily. Exactly like Mom always said, Michael agreed, kissing her forehead gently. Good night, Soph. I love you. Love you too, Dad. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, the mountain air crisp with anticipation. They were awakened early, briefed one final time, and loaded into separate armored SUVs for the journey to Denver. The convoy departed at precisely 7 o'clock a.m., aiming to arrive at the courthouse well before the 9:30 a.m. scheduled testimony. Michael sat with Sophie in the second vehicle, both dressed in clothes provided by the facility, simple, conservative attire appropriate for a court appearance. Through the tinted windows, he watched the mountain landscape gradually give way to suburban developments and finally the Denver skyline. They arrived at the courthouse through a secure underground entrance, bypassing the media gathered at the main steps. The building hummed with activity as prosecutors, law enforcement, and court personnel prepared for what promised to be one of the most significant corruption trials in Colorado history. Rebecca was whisked away to a secure waiting room, while Michael and Sophie were directed to a separate area, a U.S. Marshal introduced herself as their protective detail, explaining that they would be called to testify after Rebecca had completed her testimony. Mr. Reynolds, a voice called from the doorway. A tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit approached, hand extended. I'm Andrew Matthews, lead prosecutor. Thank you for being here today. Your eyewitness account of what happened at the North Star will be invaluable. I'm just doing what's right, Michael replied, shaking the man's hand. Well, it's more than most would do, Matthews said. Miss Morgan's testimony is about to begin. Would you like to observe from the gallery? Michael glanced at Sophie, considering whether the proceedings would be appropriate for her. As if reading his mind, Matthews added, We've arranged a comfortable room with a court liaison who can stay with your daughter during the testimony. She's experienced with children in court situations. What do you think, Soph? Michael asked. Would you be okay waiting with someone while I watch Miss Rebecca testify? Sophie nodded solemnly. I'll be okay, Dad. You should help Miss Rebecca. The court liaison, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Bennett, arrived to introduce herself. After ensuring Sophie was comfortable with the arrangement, Michael followed Matthews to the courtroom. The scene that greeted him was impressive. A large, wood-paneled chamber filled nearly to capacity. Media representatives occupied a designated section, while law enforcement and interested citizens filled the remaining seats. At the defense table sat Charles Harrison, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture relaxed and confident despite the charges against him. Flanking him were three attorneys whose expensive suits and leather portfolios screamed high-priced legal talent. As Michael took his seat in the gallery, the side door opened and Rebecca entered, escorted by two U.S. Marshals. She looked different today, professional and composed in a conservative navy suit, her hair neatly styled, her bearing dignified. Only someone who knew her well would notice the slight tremor in her hands as she was sworn in. For the next 2 hours, Michael watched as Rebecca methodically dismantled Charles Harrison's criminal empire with ledgers, bank records, emails, and first-hand accounts. Her testimony was devastating, precise, detailed, and utterly credible. She traced money through shell companies, documented kickbacks to government officials, and established clear patterns of corruption and intimidation. Throughout her testimony, Harrison remained impassive, occasionally whispering to his attorneys, but showing no outward reaction to the damning evidence. Only once did his mask slip, when Rebecca described discovering the first accounting discrepancies. His eyes hardened momentarily, a flash of cold rage quickly concealed behind practiced indifference. When Rebecca's testimony concluded, the judge called a brief recess before Michael would be called to testify about the events at the North Star. As the courtroom began to clear, Michael moved to follow the crowd into the hallway. That's when it happened. A commotion erupted near the main entrance, raised voices, then sudden movement as several court officers rushed toward the disturbance. Michael's combat instincts triggered immediately, his body tensing for action. Through the shifting crowd, he caught a glimpse of a man in a maintenance uniform, drawing something from beneath his jacket. Not a gun, but a small metallic object that glinted in the fluorescent light. A grenade. Time seemed to slow as Michael's training took over. He shouted a warning, already moving toward the nearest exit, scanning desperately for Rebecca in the chaos. He spotted her being hustled toward a secure door by her martial escorts, then lost sight of her as the crowd surged in panic. Before the man could release the grenade, court security officers tackled him to the ground, the device skittering across the floor unfused. Additional officers swarmed the area, securing the weapon and subduing the would-be attacker. "Reynolds!" Gaines appeared at his side, gripping his arm. "This way! Now!" "Sophie," Michael said urgently. "She's with Mrs. Bennett in the waiting room." "Already being moved to a secure location," Gaines assured him. This wasn't random. Harrison had a contingency plan. They moved swiftly through the courthouse's secure corridors, joining a group that included Rebecca, two marshals, and the lead prosecutor, Matthews. Minutes later, they were reunited with Sophie in a fortified conference room deep within the building. "Dad!" Sophie rushed into his arms, her small body trembling slightly. There were loud noises, and Mrs. Bennett said we had to run. "It's okay, kiddo," Michael soothed, holding her close. "Everyone's safe." Gaines conferred with the security team, then addressed the group. "The situation is contained. One suspect in custody, believed to be acting alone, but we're not taking chances. The judge has ordered the courtroom cleared and testimony to resume tomorrow under enhanced security." "Harrison?" Michael asked. "Still in custody," Matthews confirmed. "But this demonstrates the lengths he's willing to go to. We're moving our key witnesses to secure locations for the night." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of security briefings, contingency planning, and careful movement between secure areas. By evening, they were installed in a different safe house, this one within the city limits, but heavily guarded by U.S. Marshals. "Tomorrow I finish my testimony," Rebecca said as they shared a simple dinner. "Then yours. By tomorrow afternoon, it should be over." "And then what?" Michael asked. "For me, witness protection," she replied. "New name, new location, new life." She looked at Sophie, who was absorbed in a book provided by their security detail. "For you two, hopefully a return to normal, or whatever passes for normal after all this." Michael nodded, though he wondered if anything would ever feel truly normal again. The past 3 days had changed them all in ways that couldn't be undone. The next morning, security was even tighter as they returned to the courthouse. Harrison's desperate move had backfired spectacularly, turning public opinion firmly against him and casting him as the dangerous criminal he truly was. The courtroom was now restricted to essential personnel only, with triple the security presence. Rebecca completed her testimony without further incident, her credibility enhanced rather than diminished by the previous day's attack. Michael followed, providing a clear, factual account of the events at the North Star, including Logan's sacrifice to protect Sophie. His military background and straightforward delivery made him a compelling witness, further strengthening the case against Harrison. By late afternoon, both had completed their testimony. In the secure conference room, Matthews joined them with the news they'd been waiting for. The judge has denied bail for Harrison, citing clear evidence of witness tampering and the obvious flight risk. His assets have been frozen pending trial, which will continue over the next several weeks, with testimony from additional witnesses and financial experts. Matthews smiled. "But the core of our case, Ms. Morgan's testimony and the corroborating evidence, is now on the record. We've got him." 1 month later, Michael stood at his kitchen window, watching Sophie play in the backyard of their Pine Ridge home. The trial had concluded with Harrison and his co-conspirators found guilty on all counts. Sentencing was still pending, but the prosecutor had assured them that significant prison time was inevitable. The sound of the doorbell drew his attention. Opening the front door, he found a woman he almost didn't recognize. Auburn hair instead of brown, stylish glasses, and a confident posture that spoke of new beginnings. "Hello, Michael," she said with a familiar smile. "Rebecca?" he asked, then quickly corrected himself. I'm sorry." "It's Allison now," she replied. "Allison Carter. I'm not supposed to be here, but I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly." Michael opened the door wider, inviting her in. Sophie will be thrilled to see you. She asks about you all the time. They moved to the kitchen where Michael poured coffee. How's the new life treating you? It's strange, she admitted. New name, new history, new job across the country. Sometimes I wake up and forget who I'm supposed to be now. She smiled ruefully. But I'm free. Harrison can't touch me. That's worth everything. Sophie's delighted squeal announced her discovery of their visitor. She bounded into the kitchen, throwing her arms around Allison in an enthusiastic hug. You came back. Dad said you had to go far away. I did, Allison confirmed, returning the hug, and I'll have to leave again soon. But I wanted to see you both first. They spent the afternoon together, sharing a simple meal and carefully avoiding any mention of the trial or the danger they'd faced. As evening approached, Allison reluctantly prepared to leave. My handler will be looking for me, she explained. I'm technically violating protocol by being here. Worth it, Michael said, walking her to the door. Absolutely, she agreed. At the threshold, she hesitated. You know, in my new life story, I'm allowed to have friends from before. People I knew in college, distant relatives. There's flexibility in the narrative. Michael understood what she was suggesting. Pine Ridge isn't exactly on my travel itinerary, but I hear the East Coast has some beautiful places to visit. It does, she agreed, particularly in the fall. They said their goodbyes with Sophie extracting a promise of letters, addressed to Allison, not Rebecca, because that's your new secret name. As the rental car disappeared down the street, Michael closed the door, feeling a chapter ending, but perhaps another beginning. Life would never return to what it had been before that late-night milk run, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. 6 months later, Michael expanded Reynolds Auto Repair, hiring 2 veterans who were struggling to find work after their service. His reputation for fairness and quality work had only grown, bolstered by a quiet dignity that commanded respect throughout the community. Sophie joined a support group for children who had lost parents, her experiences helping other kids navigate their grief while strengthening her own resilience. Her nightmares about the North Star incident gradually faded, replaced by dreams where her mother and father worked together to keep her safe. Occasionally, postcards arrived from various East Coast locations. No return address, no signature, just beautiful images and simple messages. The lighthouse here reminded me of a special word, or the mountains aren't as magnificent as Colorado, but they have their charm. One crisp autumn day, Michael and Sophie visited Rachel's grave, bringing fresh flowers and news of their lives. As Sophie arranged the blooms carefully, Michael found himself talking to Rachel as he often did, telling her about their daughter's courage, about standing against corruption, about finding strength he hadn't known he possessed. She's so much like you, Rachel, he said softly, brave and determined. She sees the good that needs doing and doesn't hesitate. Sophie looked up at him. Do you think Mom knows about what we did? About helping Miss Rebecca? Miss Allison? Michael considered the question carefully. I think she does, in whatever way people know things after they're gone. And I think she'd be proud of us both. Because we were the good we wanted to see in the world? Sophie asked, echoing Rachel's favorite saying. Exactly that, Michael agreed, taking her small hand in his as they walked back to the truck. Their shadows stretched long in the late afternoon sun, a father and daughter who had faced darkness together and emerged stronger, a small family that had discovered its own kind of heroism in the simple act of doing what was right, regardless of the cost. As they drove home, Michael glanced at Sophie in the rearview mirror, her face peaceful as she watched the familiar landscape of Pine Ridge roll past. The journey that had begun with a midnight trip for milk had changed them forever. But the essential truth remained unchanged. They would face whatever came next together with the courage Rachel had taught them both.